Hey everybody, this is Cameron from Obnoxious and Anonymous, and today I am joined by Joel Bocko. He is the creator of a website, Lost in the Movies, although you can find it on the URL thedancingimage.blogspot.com, and we're here to talk about all things Twin Peaks and David Lynch. You know the drill. You've listened to a million of these podcasts now on this channel anyway. So, Joel, thank you so much for talking with me, and well, let's get started and discuss.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Let's get started and talk about how you discovered David Lynch and Twin Peaks.
Good. Actually, that was the first post of my David Lynch month this month, which is going on right now at the blog. So I'm very practiced I've had a lot of practice talking about it. So basically, I think I came to Lynch the way a lot of people do, which is through The Elephant Man. That's kind of the one that's easiest to see when you're a kid. It's like, still kind of disturbing and dark, but, it's pretty acceptable for most ages. So that was the first Lynch I saw. It didn't really lead to anything else at that point. I would say the one that really, flipped me into a Lynch fan was Mulholland Drive, which I think is pretty common, for people my age. I'm 30, so it was 18 when that movie came out. Actually didn't see it in the theaters, but on DVD. And loved it, absolutely. It's just this is the movie, it's one the movie I've been waiting all my life to see or something, because it's just Mulholland Drive. What else is there to say? After that, I sought out Blue Velvet, and actually wasn't a huge fan of it when I saw it the first time. It's grown on me. I do like it a lot. I think it's one of Lynch's most perfect films, but what I had sort of been led to expect by Mulholland Drive, I didn't quite get from Blue Velvet, which was basically this sense of a mystery that you had to kind of figure out and work your way through, and this sort of sensuous, impressionistic style and all of that. And Blue Velvet is kind of a different film in some ways. It's a little more classical and restrained in style, to my eyes at least. It's not really... It's not the type of mystery you have to really figure out. I mean, nobody really, I don't think, watches it and cares about, who the yellow man is and all that stuff, and, the man with the mustache and all that jazz. It's really more just about the themes and the, obviously the set pieces and that whole element, which is great. The comparison I make for myself personally is with Hitchcock, because when one of the first Hitchcock movies I saw was Vertigo, and I loved it. And same thing, there's a real mystery, you're really trying to figure out what's going on. And then after that, I saw Rear Window, which some people would consider, better than Vertigo. And for me, at the time, I was disappointed because I'm like, well, I can tell the guy killed his wife, But then as you see it over time, you get way more out of it. And, Rear Window is now one of my favorite films. I don't know if Blue Velvet's quite up there, but I do like it a lot, and I see what other people see in it. But right away, the Lynch that I was really attracted to was the one that felt like, he was concealing secrets, and there was something you had to kind of pursue and enter into the dream to find out, and I loved that. So that was how I, first got into Lynch. I'm sorry, long answer, but maybe you'll have to edit that one down.
Well, then how did you find Twin Peaks?
Twin Peaks came later, probably about 4 or 5 years later. I can't remember how I first heard about it. It was just kind of there in the background. Oh, there was this show, Twin Peaks. Oh, David Lynch had something to do with it. There was a dancing dwarf or something. And, it was all very vague. I rented it from Netflix back before the Gold Box came out, so there was no pilot yet on DVD. So I started with episode 1/2. It's confusing how they list it, but basically the one that follows the pilot. And I wasn't sure what to think at first. It's certainly, I saw probably about 2007 or so, and, it had some of the early 90s trademarks of TV shows, and I thought, well, I don't know, is this going to be kind of dated? Is it going to capture my interest? Is David Lynch really that involved, or did he just produce it? I knew nothing really about the show, And what grabbed me was the scene about 2/3 of the way through. You probably know which one I'm going to say, where Laura's mother's on the couch, and Donna's comforting her, and her eyes grow wide, and just, bam, you cut to Bob hiding behind the bed, staring into the camera, and it just scared I don't know if we can swear on this podcast, but I'm assuming we can, right? Yeah, it scared the shit out of me. I was what the hell just happened? There's a long-haired man who's clearly not in the room, but is suddenly in the shot, and then he's gone. And that was the moment where I knew, oh, okay, I'm going to love this show, you know. And then the next episode was the David Lynch one, with, you know, the famous Red Room sequence, and I was hooked. But I actually stopped it because I said, I got to watch this the proper way. I got to wait till I can find the pilot. And luckily, it was only a year before the Gold Box came out. And so at that point, I dove in headfirst, watched them all in a few weeks, and was sort of so taken with the show that this was probably 2 or 3 weeks into my blog, very early into my blogging career, so to speak. And I started an episode guide. Like right away after finishing the show, I went back to the pilot, wrote up each episode by episode, and sort of analyzed it and looked at what the different directors and writers had brought to the show, because you were doing David Lynch.
And you were doing this without even knowing the series as a whole, correct? You were just doing it as you went along.
No, I actually did it right after I finished the series. So I went back. It was the second time I had watched it, but I only watched it for the first time about 3 weeks earlier. So it was very fresh, and the whole experience was very fresh in my mind. But I did go back and watch it after having seen it the first time. Yeah.
It's funny that you say that in 3 weeks, because, like, you know, we've had this long debate here on this podcast about the best way to see Twin Peaks, and obviously, yes, to binge watch it is great, but you have to understand the way I saw it and the way a lot of people saw it, which was week by week, which took, you know, almost 2 years to go from pilot to movie. And what's interesting about that was that it was very much like the way people treated the show Lost. It's just we didn't have the internet back then. But what you would see would be people calling each other's friends after an episode and going, "Did you see what I just saw? What was all that about?" And people would be talking about it, or, you know, of course, the age-old thing is that, you know, people would talk about it at work. You know, they love to use this term all the time when they talk about Twin Peaks, the water cooler expression. You know, everybody's sitting around a water cooler. I personally have been to many different types of work. I've never seen people huddled around a water cooler.
Me neither. I always wondered about that.
So it sounds ridiculous, but whatever. Anyway, but a lot of people just, I mean, that's what perpetuated it, was that people discussed it week by week. And so you had, in a way, it was better, because much like Lost, you could think about an episode, dream about an episode, wonder, I mean, those characters' lives went on for 7 days, and then you tune back in, you know.
It was a real TV experience.
Exactly. And, you know, I mean, that's something that, and because the internet didn't exist back then, you know, there weren't spoilers, and there wasn't, you know, TV Guide wasn't, you know, going, hey, in the next 6 weeks, this is what's going to happen on Twin Peaks. It was like, it was truly a mystery what was going to happen next.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I think one of, you know, when I look back on, I wrote a post probably the day I finished Twin Peaks. I think before I even saw Firewalk with Me, it was sort of my first. It wasn't like a proper post. It was like 2 or 3 paragraphs like, hey, I just finished Twin Peaks, you know, blew my mind, can't wait for the movie, and offered up a few thoughts. And it's interesting that the things that fascinated me then have kind of pretty much fascinated me ever since, you know. And one of those things is, what happened? Like, why was the show so popular? Why was it then rejected? And, you know, why was the movie so despised, and yet at the beginning it was this huge phenomenon? So that's kind of fascinated me ever since. And, you know, after getting into the series and doing the whole episode guide and reviewing a bunch of Lynch films, I kind of took a break for, I guess, about 5 years, really. I mean, I was doing other things, focusing on other areas. I still counted Twin Peaks as one of my favorites, and I would discuss it from time to time online, but it wasn't something I had rewatched. In fact, the movie itself, which we'll get to in a little bit, because that's, to me, almost kind of a whole other separate phenomenon, the movie really knocked my socks off. And I then did not watch it again for another 5 years, partly because that experience was so powerful. It was almost like, okay, I don't even want to touch that. Like, that's a hell of a memory, you know, being blown away by that movie, and I just kind of want to let it sit. So,
did you watch the movie, like, right after the show? or did you, or was this?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, about 3 days later or something,
Okay.
And then I wrote a review right away, which was actually pretty mixed. Which, at this time it's kind of, in some ways my favorite Lynch film, kind of my favorite film period of the moment. It's certainly the one I've written the most about in the past few months. But the first review was like very impressed, like viscerally the movie totally won me over. But it was such a strong reaction that I was really uncomfortable with a lot of things about it. Wrote that all up in the review, and then within one day I was already saying, with a follow-up thing, well, this is actually, okay, yeah, there's problems I have with it, but damn, this movie is so powerful, I really have to consider it one of the great movies, And then I said, well, what did other people think at the time? Went to Metacritic, and it had like a 28 rating out of 100. And that kind of started another fascination I have with it, which is, what was it particularly about this film that got people so angry and dismissive in a way that I've really never seen anybody react to at least a good movie before? And I think whether or not you like Fire Walk with Me and it works for you, it's a well-made movie. It's and I understand what you're talking about in terms of some of the rush of the production and some of the things he may have missed, but certainly in terms of production values, it's not like a grade B movie or anything. It's got great performances. It's by one of the the great directors and all this stuff, but the way people wrote about it, you'd think it was like an absolute like Z-grade slasher movie or something. Like it was just completely annihilated by critics. So that was another thing that always fascinated me. But yeah, for 5 years, didn't watch it again, and then last fall I did, just not out of a big Twin Peaks binge, but just I happened to finally be like, oh, you know what, I haven't watched this movie in a long time, I'm going to watch it again. And a few months after that, I kind of fell back into Twin Peaks obsession mode, and since then it's been a lot of writing about David Lynch, a lot of writing about Twin Peaks, a lot of visiting, discussions and stuff like talking with you right now, and really just renewing my interest in it. And the surprising thing is, it had nothing to do initially with the Blu-ray coming out. I didn't even know about that, and it just ended up coinciding. There's something seems to be in the air, because I've been noticing on Twitter and all these other places that suddenly people are really talking about the show a lot again.
Well, there's
in
a
way
reason
that I haven't seen.
There's a reason for
ever.
that.
What's that?
There's a reason for that.
Well, I mean, yeah, part of it is the Blu-ray thing, but a lot of it I was noticing before that was really, other than for diehard Twin Peaks fans, it wasn't something that was really in the news or that people seemed to be that aware of, and yet I was noticing all these 20-year-olds, hey, I just watched Twin Peaks again, or for the first time, blah blah blah, talking, throwing it out there as a reference, and I don't know, it seemed kind of interesting. So,
well, what's going on is that it's showing up on everybody's Facebook and Twitter feeds. So people obviously don't want to feel left out. And so everyone's, retweeting and reposting things. And so that Missing Pieces trailer of the deleted scenes from Fire Walk with Me just basically went around the globe, even though I would say about 75% of the people doing that haven't even seen the movie.
Yeah. They probably think it's deleted scenes from the show.
Perhaps. So your website, Lost in the Movies, you write about a lot of different things, and but so what made you decide for the last month or so to dedicate your site to to David Lynch's filmography?
Good question. Well, basically, it started by accident. I was buying something on Barnes & Noble, and not even buying, I was using a gift card. I think I was kind of broke at the time, and it was like, I'm getting something with the gift card, but I want to use the whole gift card. That thing, you got that little remainder on there, and you got to get rid of it. So I had something like $10 left on the gift card, and I couldn't find anything that fit within that. I think it was a Criterion DVD sale, but even half price, those things can be pretty inexpensive. So I was looking at different options, and I noticed I had something left over in my cart from about 5 years ago when I, was really into Twin Peaks and all that, and it was a book called Full of Secrets, something like a critical analysis of Twin Peaks. And it's basically a bunch of essays by critics, scholars, various random people on all different aspects of the show. One of them talks about, Cooper, how he fits into the detective genre, and somebody else talks about, the show as a TV phenomenon, how it related to other genres like soap operas and stuff like that, and other people go more, into the show's psychology or its style or something, all the different aspects. So that seemed kind of interesting. It was out of print, so I had like a used copy or something, and it was just sitting in there for a long time, and I thought, oh, well, that'll fill out the order. I haven't watched Twin Peaks in a while. It'll be fun to read that. So I got that book, and early this year, later than I thought actually, it was like end of February, I actually finally got to it and started reading it, and it just slowly started to reactivate my interest in the show. It was like, sometimes you have that aha moment where you sit up and look around and you go, oh, this thing that's like a favorite of mine, I actually haven't experienced it in a long time. I always talk about it and it's always there, but, maybe it's time to revisit. So I read Laura Palmer's The Secret Diary of Laura Palmer by Jennifer Lynch, which I'd never done before.
Have you read The Secret Autobiography of Dale Cooper?
No, not yet. It's still waiting in the wings. But, I've heard interesting things.
It's very different because obviously it was supposed to be Cooper investigating Teresa Banks' murder, not Chet Desmond. So there's a lot of stuff in the diary about him and Sam doing the mystery. So it kind of conflicts with the official timeline canon of it all, to use a modern phrase.
I would kind of like, I think, because I'm already one of those people who feels like you can kind of throw the canon out the window. There's so many things that already contradict each other. It's kind of fun to see the alternate realities of it for me, But I did, I did read the Laura Palmer diary, and then I went back and watched the show again. And
I think it's amazing that the show is great, in my opinion. I mean, for many, 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 many reasons. But one of the reasons is that, I mean, let's be honest here. I mean, after you've seen the show once and basically twice, let's say, you know the outcome of the mystery, and yet for some reason it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? You can watch that show 50 million times and never get tired of it, because it's so weird, because there's so many shows where it's like there's a central mystery or something, and once you know, it's like, oh, I don't want to go back.
I'm not that compelled to revisit Lost, and I enjoyed it when it was on, but it doesn't, it doesn't hold that much interest for me to go back to it. And actually, I'll say that we'll tangent briefly, because this is kind of funny. I had Lost spoiled for me because I watched most of the seasons. I think I kind of missed the last one for some reason. Maybe I didn't have cable or something. I can't remember. But the final episode was on, and I'd been following it all along, and obviously I wanted to know, I kind of lost interest a little when they went off on crazy tangents of time travel and stuff, but I was like, okay, spoilers for Lost, warning anyone who's listening. But I went on the website and I thought, okay, boy, I'll watch the final episode. This will be exciting. And they had a little promo thing on there on abc.com that said previous episode recap. So I thought, okay, I haven't watched this season. I'll watch what was on the previous episode. So I play it. It's about 30 or 60 seconds, and I'm watching it, and it's all this stuff that seems really climactic, and it ends, and I realize when it's over, for some reason, somebody had assembled and edited a recap of the final episode and put that online as the previously on Lost thing. So basically, instead of getting to watch the final episode, I just saw this tiny little recap. Now, the interesting thing is, and this kind of says something about, I guess, Lost versus Twin Peaks, I never did that. I didn't go on to watch the finale because I was like, oh, now I know what happened.
Oh, well,
and I wasn't. So that already kind of tells you it was more of just trying to kind of figure out what was going on versus really being deeply invested in the world and the characters.
Well, I will say this about Lost is that some people like the finale, some people don't, but that's the nature of finales. But I will say that the music, the direction, the acting, the writing of the final episode is probably in the top 20 greatest episodes of all time.
All right. Well, I should watch it then. Now you've got my interest. I'll have to.
I mean, I've actually shown that episode to several people who've never even watched the show, like any of it. I say just watch the final episode. And
now you've got me interested.
And so many people I know are just are moved to tears
Wow.
Just by the music, and Michael Cicchino, I mean, come on, the guy's a master, but his music in Lost is different, but I mean, very great. However, Lost is not Twin Peaks. It's a very different thing. But one thing I really love about Twin Peaks that a lot of
don't get me wrong, I did like Lost. I did enjoy it.
It's a different thing. It's a whole different smoke monster. You know what I mean? But what I'm saying is, you were talking about when you went to see when you first started watching Twin Peaks, you were going, okay, some '90s staples and this and that. Honestly, I don't, except for the hair. Sometimes I don't know what you're talking about, only because the show is completely timeless because there's no modern music, and if you notice, most of the girls, unless they're in a like background extras, nobody's wearing jeans. Everybody's in skirts and sweaters. And so you create this 1950s vibe in a modern setting. And so, I mean, there's no cell phones, there's no internet, there's none of that stuff. People, but
I think where I was getting that vibe from initially with the show was, I mean, keep in mind too, this is episode 1, not a pilot, so it's the first one they shot on sets, and the sets are pretty good. Like, I like the sets a lot, but I think the scene that sticks out in my head is the jail cell. It was Bobby and Mike sitting in the jail cell, and it had a little bit of like sort of a studio feel, and then also the other thing, and this is something I think people get more, because I've listened to people watching it for the first time and whatever. A lot of people, the first time they see it, they don't really get the Badalamenti music. They go, oh, this is kind of over the top and soap opera-ish, which, is part of the point. A.
Well, that's
and B, it has so many more subtle shades than that. But a lot of times that's people's first impression. So I don't remember exactly, but I may have watched it and heard sort of, some of the notes going, oh, okay, well, I don't know. Is this sort of a quirky, offbeat 90s thing, 90s, drama with a twist, or is there more going on, and so on and so forth. And as I watched that first episode, even though he didn't direct it, there were some Lynchian touches in there which sort of hooked me in. And then when I watched the following one, episode 2, so to speak, that was where I would say I really got reeled in, because, at this point, keep in mind too, I've always been more a movie person than a TV person. And the Dwayne Dunham episode is very good. It does a good job, transitioning the show from this sort of feature-length pilot into something that can actually carry on week to week and alternating between characters and, holding your interest. But it does, to a certain extent, look, even with all the good things, it looks like a TV show, whereas the second David Lynch gets behind the camera and you start episode 2 with a wide-shot, overhead view, a family of 4 sitting at a dinner table, one of which is wearing an Indian headdress, and they're chewing for, like a minute or two, no dialogue, and somebody bursts, it's just a whole different ballgame, and that at that point it felt kind of more like watching a movie almost than a TV show,
Right. I think the people that complain about Badalamente's music are 2014 hipsters. But back in 1990, nobody complained about that music. That was actually one of the most haunting things about it, was people were saying, I don't even know what's going on in this show, but the music. I just like the music. But
yeah, for sure.
And some people actually just tuned into the show to hear the score. I mean, that soundtrack sold through the roof.
Yeah.
So I mean,
I don't remember. I honestly don't remember if the music struck. I do remember watching it full on the first time. That parts of it felt very like soap operatic, which wasn't necessarily a bad thing.
No, I mean,
it was like sort of a quality I felt about it that actually, as I watched it more, I kind of felt less for some reason.
Well, when Audrey plays the music on the jukebox in episode 2 and starts swaying and dancing to it, which is a lot of people's one of their favorite moments of the show.
Yeah, me too. That was my top. I had to do a top 10 moments thing recently, and that was one of them. Yeah,
and it's it's one of those moments where you realize that the score isn't just the score of the show; it's the music they listen to.
Yeah, I love that.
And that's really interesting. And that's reflected in the previous episode when Audrey's dancing in her dad's office as well. And obviously they're listening to Julie Cruz music, and it just the thing is though, it's just it creates this ethereal, otherworldly place. Like even though there's Twin Peaks and then the Ghostwood Forest and the Black Lodge and all that stuff, the world of Twin Peaks is another world. Do you know what I mean? The whole point of that town is to be a world away from the world, so that Cooper can feel like he's crossed over some threshold. So
well the Julie Cruz thing is interesting too, because I remember feeling like watching the pilot and enjoying it, but the moment where they go into the roadhouse, suddenly it was like on a different level for me. It was like, okay, we've sort of been hovering, above this strangeness and this sort of mystery, this darkness underneath you sense it's there. You're not quite, and the second they're there, it's like, no, now it's enveloping you. Now you're totally within that. Sort of like in Blue Velvet when they play Mysteries of Love. It opens up a whole new dimension in the movie, because these things that Lynch is suggesting through the visuals and through the these little elements, but sort of withholding a little bit, because I think he does that actually in his early movies, especially compared to where he goes later. I think he withholds a little bit. He has sort of a restrained style, and that's part of what appeals to a lot of people about it, is you're sort of peering into it. But the second a Julie Cruz song comes on there, it just becomes palpable. That mood that he's chasing, suddenly you're wrapped up in it. I don't know. I'm a big fan of those songs.
At the time when the show first came out, it was interesting because it actually made people rediscover Blue Velvet, which at that time, even though it had only been 3.5 years since it came out, it had already been buried on VHS. No one cared. No one, no one thought about that movie at all. But when Twin Peaks came out, and it wasn't just the fact that it was a small town with sex and drugs and stuff, because that obviously harkens back to Blue Velvet as well. It was the fact that Kyle Mclaughlin became an overnight sensation as Federal Bureau of Investigation Special Agent Dale Cooper. Because he was the star of Blue Velvet, people went back to see it. And it's interesting because a lot of people at the time referred to Blue Velvet as the prequel, even though it's not really a prequel. But spiritually, it kind of is a prequel. You can see Jeffries almost becoming Agent Cooper because of his experience. And if you watch, Blue Velvet basically is an R-rated version of Twin Peaks before Twin Peaks became rated R. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah, totally agree. And somebody said, basically they pitched it or they sold it or they marketed it as Blue Velvet on television. And for a lot of people, because also it's interesting, Lynch, his first 3 or 4 movies are very diverse. You've got Eraserhead, which is totally, off in this strange world, one of the most unique movies ever made. You have Elephant Man, which he sort of brings his touch to a more sort of mainstream movie, but kind of an art film where, he's allowed to kind of still experiment a little bit. And then you have Dune, which is sort of his attempt to squeeze himself into the blockbuster format, which to me, I know it does, I guess there are some people out there who love it. Didn't work so great for me. But and then you get Blue Velvet, and really it's interesting to realize he'd been directing movies, including short films, for 20 years at that point. He was 40 years old. He'd directed 4 feature films, and yet in some ways Blue Velvet feels like, the first truly Lynchian, in the sense that, even in Eraserhead, you're off in a totally strange world with its own rules. In Blue Velvet, it's the first one where he really mixes the surrealism with something more grounded in day-to-day reality. Granted, it's still got that weird 50s pastiche going on. There's a lot of stuff that isn't, realistic per se, but it's the first one in which he kind of mixes the two.
But it's not...
And that, to many people, defined what was Lynchian from then on. And
right.
That's what they looked for in a work by David Lynch.
But it wasn't... it wasn't unrealistic enough, though, where people would say, "Well, this couldn't happen." Yes, there was that. There was that.
No supernatural.
No, but there was that 50s flavor to it, but it wasn't like nobody sat there and said, "Well, this is unrealistic." It seemed like this is
still there.
Yeah, it felt like this.
Hello.
Hello.
Okay. Yeah, I get disconnected from you for a little bit.
No, I mean, just saying that it feels like
Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine.
That's weird. Can you hear me okay?
I just said that.
That's weird. I can't hear it. You keep breaking out on my end, but you can hear me?
Perfectly.
Okay. Well, that's all right. I guess it's recording then. So, sorry, can you just, maybe you can cut it out, but can you repeat what you just said?
I was just saying that it doesn't feel like oh, he's just doing a 50s thing. It's not style over substance. It feels like the style is the substance, part of it. And it doesn't feel like, yeah, that, like I said, there is a 50s flavor, but it's not like it's the 50s. It feels like there are towns where people still kind of dress like this, and they do.
And it also feels like Lynch sort of applying his quirks or his motifs to like you're saying, to something that still feels grounded in reality. And I think for a lot of people that was such a startling experience and such a unique experience that became what they defined as Lynchian. And I think one of the interesting things about Twin Peaks is it begins very much like Blue Velvet. It becomes something pretty different by the end, certainly by Firewalk with Me, although there's obviously still similarities. And I think it's interesting to watch people's reaction as that happens. A lot of the people who are totally on board with Twin Peaks at first, and I'm talking probably more about critics here than necessarily, average viewers or whatever, but a lot of people who wrote about the show and stuff like that and hyped it up in the beginning, the less it became like Blue Velvet, the more pissed off they got, basically. And that includes becoming more supernatural, focusing more on Laura in a way, certainly by Firewalk with Me, who's sort of a Dorothy Valens character, than on Cooper, who's sort of a Jeffrey character coming into this world and rescuing somebody, basically focusing on the victim of abuse rather than the person coming in and saving the day. And that it's interesting to see how that shift, which is very important in Lynch's career, caused a lot of trouble for the show itself.
Well, what's interesting too is it wasn't just the fact that maybe a little bit for some people it was the less and less it got away from being kind of like a Blue Velvet thing. Mm-hmm. It's the fact that at the time some critics believed that, oh, we're getting into the supernatural. Okay, so Lynch is Lynch is cheating because we were under the impression that it was someone in this town, not somebody in this town possessed by an evil spirit. Do you know what I mean? So and while if you can see,
thought it was a cheat.
They thought it was a cheat, and if you look at the series as a whole and the movie and stuff, you realize it's not really a cheat. Although if you're a cynical, bastard, I can see I can see how somebody might think that. But I find it harder and harder to believe that people would think that more today than back when it came out. Because, again, like I said, you had a whole week in between episodes.
Yeah.
So it made people really antsy. And what's funny is that one of the criticisms that keeps being harped about Twin Peaks, and even Rob Marshall, who did Veronica Mars, brought this up when he was doing first season of Veronica Mars. They said, oh, are we going to get the mystery solved? And he goes, yeah, I'm not, we saw what happened with Twin Peaks. I'm not going to do that. Yeah. And it's like, okay, wait a minute, dude. Listen, I love Veronica Mars, but let's just get something straight here. Season 1 was not 22 episodes and then left you hanging. It was 7. It was 7 totally episodes. True. So, and a lot of people back then were like, again, you're dealing with almost 2 months of people watching this surreal mystery on television. They wanted an answer. But no, what happened was they put it in the springtime. So we had to wait an entire summer, right? And then during that summer, they re-aired it. Okay, so everyone's rewatching it again because obviously they didn't have DVR and internet for people to rewatch it. So they re-aired it during the summer. Okay, perfect. And then the first episode of season 2 comes out. And while in retrospect, yes, they did kind of give you an answer to who killed Laura Palmer a little bit in that episode. People felt cheated. They wanted an answer, not realizing that for the most part, to answer who killed Laura Palmer right away would be the, almost the death nail to the show because the show hadn't yet, established itself as anything more than a Who Killed Laura Palmer mystery. Yes, there were other mysteries and other characters and people, lots to invest in. But for the most part, if at that moment, if they had solved her murder at the beginning of the second season, people weren't going to follow it. I mean, they solved the mystery in episode 16, right? And people complain to this day, oh, they shouldn't have solved it in episode 16. It's like, exactly. Yeah, but and I
how long did you want to wait?
And I understand that. However, the problem is that I find it so funny because one, it's like still that's less than a regular season of television, 16 episodes.
Yeah, it is.
Right. So it's not like Laura Palmer's mystery went on and on and on, which is one of the things that cracks me up when David Lynch says he never intended on solving it. Because that really, I'm sorry, I love David Lynch to pieces, but that would have pissed off everybody, including me. Yeah. You know what I mean? If you just indefinitely went on 5 years, who killed Laura Palmer? Who cares?
I want to ask you sort of the flip side of what you asked me. You were watching it at the time, and you probably discussed it somewhat on other podcasts. I don't want to make you totally repeat yourself, but what can you offer sort of a perspective on how you first heard about it? Because one of the interesting things when I did this whole series that I did on my blog recently of excerpts, critics and news reports and bloggers and stuff from later bloggers, not bloggers in 1990, but the response to the show as it went along, and you can see a lot of build up to it, where they're running articles in January and February. One of the articles is actually from September of 1989, like when the show had just been picked up. So there was obviously this buildup. Like, when did you personally first hear about it? What was your kind of anticipation or response? When did you get into it? And what was your feeling as it was going on, sort of, from the contemporaneous point of view?
Well, hang on. Let me just finish this one thought, and then I'll get back to that.
Sure. Yeah.
No, so I mean, I find it so funny that Lynch wanted to indefinitely go off on this tangent and have the mystery slink back in the background. I don't think anyone would have gone for that. But it's so funny because if they had just aired season 1 with season 2, like a lot of people when they first discovered it on Bravo in the 1990s. Nobody knew when the shift happened from season 1 and 2 because it flowed. You know what I mean? When Mark Frost and Lynch talk about how, ABC forced us to solve Laura Palmer's murder, it's funny because you don't get that vibe at all from the show. The mystery unravels organically. I mean, it doesn't feel like. I mean, you never feel like, oh, this is the episode where they forced us to finish it. It's like, no, it feels like
kind of a little bit. I feel that way in not the reveal, but and I guess we're talking Twin Peaks. We're gonna talk spoilers. When Leland's in the jail cell, that episode,
right?
That one to me feels slightly rushed, but like you're saying, like nothing up to that point in terms of her mystery does.
Right. And it's funny, that episode, I love that episode, even when Leland screams in the jail cell and runs against the wall and the wall bounces, which, by the way, looks great on TV and
character scene. I always think of him as kind of maybe Daffy Duck. I don't know. Like,
yeah, but what I'm saying,
and shaking his head.
I know, but what I'm saying though is on VHS and TV, it looked fine. Now with DVD and Blu-ray, that wall is going to bounce, and it's going to bounce really hard. Anyway, I love that episode to pieces. And there's a reason why that when that episode ends, the next episode says 3 days later. They're obviously announcing this is Act 2. You know what I mean? And again, they're going to Leland's funeral, which, if you notice, Laura's funeral happened 4 days in, and so again they're keeping this motif of 4 days before the funeral. What I find interesting though is when I went to school, I was in high school at the time, and I went to school, and a kid that knew I watched the show, and he watched it off and on, but he caught that episode on Saturday night at 10 o'clock when they solved the murder totally, and he came up to me and said, "Is the show over?" And that's how the vibe was. It felt like the show was over. And if I can say one more thing before I jump to that, again, if you've listened to this podcast, chances are you've seen Twin Peaks, all right? So don't listen to this because I'm going to spoil something big. But
I think I already did with my previous statement.
All right, well,
I guess there could be any reason that happened.
It's been 25 years, people. Yeah. If you're listening to Twin Peaks podcast, it's on you. Anyway, here's the thing, and I knew this at the time. I may have been 14 years old, but I knew this at the time. In that episode, when the murder is solved, Leland's dead. And they're standing out there in the woods, right? You have Cooper, Truman, Albert, Major Briggs, right? And I think Hawk's there too, right? I think.
Yeah, probably.
He's
should be.
If he's not there, he's there in spirit. He's there in spirit.
Exactly.
But what's interesting is this. Truman says, if Bob was real, then we had him here trapped. Where's Bob now? And it cuts to Cooper drinking coffee and looking out. But and it's supposed to be this kind of omniscient, like, oh, I'm thinking about Bob. But when he says, "Where's Bob now?" and it cuts to Agent Cooper, I thought, holy shit, Cooper's possessed.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, foresight.
And then there's hints in the next couple episodes that you get the vibe that Cooper's possessed when he's like talking to the FBI agents at the table, because he has this weird look in his eye when he's addressing them and stuff like that. And, Major Briggs is disappearing, and you just get this vibe that, like, Bob is in Cooper. And then, of course, it turns out it's not. But then at the end of the show, what happens? Bob's inside Cooper. And so I remember at the time when I was in high school and the show was over, and it was like, oh, shit, Bob's inside Cooper. And this was before the movie came out. So this was summer of 91 when the show ended. Mm-hmm. And when the show ended, it had it concluded with the last two episodes together as an ABC Sunday night movie, basically. It was interesting because it felt like the show was going to go down in history as not about who killed Laura Palmer. It was going to go down as the evolution of Cooper's innocence to corruption.
Mm-hmm. Total Lynchian theme, yeah.
And, and it just felt like, oh my God, like he is showing you this, because the thing is though, is that the first time you watch this show, you are being built up. I mean, you think that, a lot of people, I've talked to so many people about this, and they all agree that the show is building up to a Lord of the Rings ending between Cooper and Wyndham Earl and the Black Lodge.
That's what they wrote, kind of.
Well, but you feel that you're going to get this like big epic ending, and you do and you don't. It's you get an ending, but sometimes you look at it and you go, it's a little anticlimactic. It's a little when you're dealing with Cooper and Wyndham Earl. You want a little bit of
it depends. I think
it depends on your mood.
Two schools of thought on it. One is what you're talking about. The other is, and I'll admit I kind of belong to this school, I was just never that compelled by him as a villain. I was compelled by the idea of him, but when we meet him and, he's sort of what he is, and obviously Lynch kind of felt that way too, because, he went and scrapped the whole last third and said, no, I'm just going to have one scene with Wyndham Earl getting his soul sucked and his ass kicked by Bob, basically. And I'll admit, like, I know I'm probably offending a lot of Wyndham Earl fans out there, because there are a lot of them. I don't hate Wyndham Earl, and I think he definitely, his storyline sort of brings up the quality of season 2. But I'll admit I was kind of relieved when he kind of gets pushed aside and it becomes more about Bob and the Black Lodge sort of taking over and Cooper grappling with all of those elements versus the more sort of, what was he? What's the character I'm thinking of? The Sherlock Holmes villain?
Moriarty.
Moriarty, like that. Yeah, exactly. Rather than sort of the criminal mastermind type of thing. So.
All right, let's compromise. Let's just say that that the final episode of Twin Peaks should have been 2 hours by itself.
I certainly wouldn't have minded that. It might be my favorite episode, so another hour on top of that, I would be in pig heaven.
So the show ends, and then about 5 months later, I'm reading TV Guide, and I'm sure anyone who has seen my Jennifer Lynch interview will know about this story. But I'm reading TV Guide, and I have it clipped out still to this day. When I was in high school, we had to do Secret Santa and that type of thing, and this kid in my class who I honestly didn't think liked me very much at all, because he never talked to me at all but he made me a David Lynch Twin Peaks scrapbook.
Yeah, I remember that.
And and there was a lot of good stuff in there, but he left me a lot of blank pages, and I had been ripping out things for a long time, so I was able to put stuff in there. And of course, this was the day of microfiche, not the internet, so you could find stuff. But what I found so interesting is that there was a thing in the TV guide, and maybe I will take a picture of it and put it up as a link on this podcast, because maybe somebody would be interested in it. But there was an announcement for the Fire Walk With Me movie, and it was like, what the hell? Again, this is before the internet, so you had no clue that this was happening. And the thing is that they talked about, it was going to be about Laura Palmer, and I remember going, oh, okay, great. Now you talk, and I was totally on board, but again, as the movie production went on, word came around from just little not sites, but I'm so thinking modern right now, magazines and stuff like that, little things, that it was going to be almost like Godfather 2. It was going to be a sequel and a prequel. And,
I remember you telling me.
And I was like way on board with that. And then I remember being, it was about, must have been about a month and a half or so before the movie came out. They did a big article about the Cannes premiere, where it got booed and stuff like that, and they talked about that there was a 135-minute running time, and that almost all the characters but Laura and the peripheral characters with her, everybody else had gotten cut out but had been shot. And I remember thinking, well, that's odd. But and then so the thing is, though, is that you ask why people went crazy about that movie. Several reasons. One, it wasn't a sequel, and everyone wanted to know what happened next, because they felt like, well, even my own mom, after she saw the movie, said, and the point of that was what? Because
that's the most interesting part to me of the thing. And actually, I was thinking of this when you were saying when I was listening to the Fire Walk With Me conversation you guys had, because I think you can sum up the difference of opinion on Twin Peaks with the title itself. The movie's called Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me, right? I think there's sort of two schools of thought on it, and even some of the people who like it might be in a different school of thought than me. I think there's the people who want it to be more Twin Peaks, like almost kind of lose, just Twin Peaks the movie. And then my opinion sometimes, and I say this as a huge Twin Peaks fan, I almost wish it wasn't Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me. I wish they got rid of the Twin Peaks and just called it Fire Walk With Me.
When you see
actually literally within the movie went even a little bit further and took out some of the few things that do remain that are there to sort of set it up to lead into the show. Because to me, and I didn't mean to totally cut you off. We'll go back to the thing you were saying in a second, but what you were just saying kind of spurred this thought. To me, when I saw the movie after plunging through Twin Peaks and loving it and couldn't wait to see a Twin Peaks movie, I was blown away by the movie, but the stuff that blew me away was totally different from what appealed to me about Twin Peaks. And I kind of thought, this almost deserves to be a different movie, like to almost be only even more tangentially related to Twin Peaks, the show, because I think the strengths of the movie are basically the opposite of the show. If you want a movie to sort of embrace its strengths, I think the strengths of it is the total empathy with Laura Palmer, the total commitment to her perspective, the total sort of darkness and singularity of it. And I think you said on the previous podcast, which is a true point. I've heard a lot of people make it. They neglect the community. They don't make it enough about. But I actually think within the context of that movie, that works really well. So when I watch it, I think the regrets I have, or the things that I feel like are flaws, are that there's still a few things clinging to it from the show. And really, for the movie to be truly what it kind of wants to be, it almost has to abandon that completely, which I think is going to make the missing pieces really interesting, because those are the elements that are more Twin Peaks, and I think it will be, for me anyways, easier to enjoy them. Like I'm kind of glad they're not doing the supercut, and they're leaving them almost as two different, like, alternate versions. Like here's Fire Walk With Me about Laura Palmer, and here's Twin Peaks the movie about all this other crazy cool stuff that happened. So that's kind of my take. But I'll let you go back to your thing now. But I just had to throw that in there just because I thought.
Well,
I don't know. That's a very interesting point that you made about like what your mother said, and I think a lot of people feel that way.
Right. I'm not saying that I do.
Yeah.
What
no.
What
Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying you and I are in disagreement. But
I'm trying to explain to you why people turned on the movie.
Yeah, and I agree definitely.
And you have to understand this movie did not come out 5 years later. It came out the next year. So people
After
who were
a cliffhanger climax.
Exactly. So people were like, "Oh my God, there had to be a reason why they rushed this." You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, one thing is if you go and watch the trailer for Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, you will notice they did cut out the words for Twin Peaks. It's called Fire Walk with Me in the trailer. Obviously not in the movie. But in the trailer, they refer to the movie only as Fire Walk with Me.
Very interesting.
But anyway, so yeah, 1, it wasn't a sequel. 2, all the characters people liked got cut out.
Mm-hmm.
3, it reminded people that Laura Palmer was sexually abused.
Mm-hmm. Big one, in my opinion.
That's a big one. 4, people didn't like the way the second season turned out, and so they poo-pooed it right away. Do you know what I mean? I mean, there's I'm sure there's more reasons than that. But, just off the top of my head, those are some of the big ones. And also, there was no humor. It was all dark, right?
Yeah. And the closest to humor is the shooting a guy in a drug deal.
Exactly. So
at least in the second half.
And so, like I've said many times on other podcasts, that Fire Walk with Me, as much as I really do like it, I will acknowledge with people that yes, it is the antithesis of the show, and you need to know that going in. Because if you don't, you will have an unpleasant experience for the most part. Because you'll be sitting there the whole time going, judging the film for what it's not than what it is.
Yeah, and it's amazing. Reading a lot of the negative responses, that pops up a lot. Is like, well, you know, it becomes frustrating for me personally because for whatever reason when I first saw it, I guess just because even though I'd only seen a few Lynch films, I was already kind of hooked into David Lynch's world and perspective. So maybe I was able to, you know, switch from being like, okay, Twin Peaks movie coming up. Oh, whoa, no, this is a David Lynch movie. Oh, okay, all right, well, you know what I mean? Like, I was kind of able to go with that, but I noticed a lot of people who, for whatever reason, are waiting for the Twin Peaks movie. And, yeah, exactly like you said, they're like, wait a second. And, like, sometimes I was listening to another podcast, and they watched it, and they were just kind of knocking it. And it was so frustrating to listen to because the points they were making were almost the points why I think it's a good movie. You know, like they're talking about, well, you know, like you were saying, they're like, oh, well, this is, you know, Twin Peaks was fun, and it was this and that, and this is just like, really, this is just a depressing movie. It's like Laura Palmer it's like, well, yeah, but that's the whole point. Like,
right.
David Lynch is saying, you enjoyed this show, but here's what was happening that you kind of knew was happening in a way and didn't really want to deal with, and I'm going to dredge it all up and kind of force you to deal with it. And a lot of people, understandably, really reject that. And I think that's a natural response, but I think what makes the movie so strong is that if you're able to kind of move past that, it's really like one of the most compassionate movies he's ever made, like up there with The Elephant Man. And I think there's a few authors who've really phrased this well. I wish I had the quotes right up in front of me, but just from memory, Michael Chion, I don't know how to pronounce. He's a French author. He wrote a study of David Lynch, and he said, that what Lynch and Engels did was like almost sort of in terms of, thinking, trying to match how their audience was thinking, it was a mistake. But it was a very generous one because they assumed that people actually cared about this character, who they'd been, watching, who they'd been hearing all the sordid details of her life and how she was murdered and who murdered her and who killed, it's this big parlor game. And they almost kind of made the assumption, well, if people care this much about who killed her, they must care about her. And really, a lot of people didn't. And then the other great quote that I can think of is David Foster Wallace he wrote a big piece on David Lynch. I don't know. Have you ever read that one?
Remind me. I don't know.
Something. What is it? David Lynch keeps his head.
Okay.
It's like one of the best essays on Lynch. I don't necessarily agree with all the points he made, but he's a great writer and he gets to a lot of meaty stuff. But he has a quote in there where he says, "I'm not saying Fire Walk with Me succeeds in everything it does, because in his opinion it doesn't. But he says the reason it got so slammed and criticized, it wasn't because it didn't succeed in its mission. It's because of what its mission was, and that's what people rejected." And I think that's true, because I think ultimately it comes down to the difference between the series and the film. Twin Peaks is a great TV show. It's got all these brilliant sequences. It's one of my favorite things. I would say, and it's always tricky to kind of make this divide, because most great art is entertaining and most great entertainment has artistic, elements. Ultimately, at the end of the day, the show is about entertaining, right? It's about watching, this world and being sucked into it and caring about the characters and being wrapped up in the story and having fun in a way. And the movie is something different. It's more like an art film in that sense, that you're going on this, you're going to a really dark, unpleasant place, but, the way he takes you there, the beauty of the style and the intensity of it, it's just a whole different experience, and it requires a whole different mindset. And I think that's what, confused so many people, and not just the people who loved the show, but some of the people who didn't like the show, who may have been more receptive to Fire Walk with Me if it had no relation to Twin Peaks, rejected it because they said, "Oh, this is just David Lynch sucking up to Twin Peaks fans," which is ridiculous, because like you're saying, Twin Peaks fans often hated the movie. But if you look at some of the reviews and responses of the time, you'll actually read stuff like this one guy saying, "Well, clearly David Lynch is just giving Twin Peaks fans what he thinks they want, so he can make money off this franchise." Totally ignorant thing to say, but basically the movie, it alienated the people who would have liked a Twin Peaks movie, and it alienated the people who might have liked, a non-Twin Peaks movie dealing with the same subject. And it kind of got caught between the two, that's kind of the tragedy of Fire Walk with Me, in my opinion.
All right, so let me just run down some quick things here.
Sure.
Like I said, I really like Fire Walk with Me. I say I do love it. I'm just saying that, like I said, I think I said to you last time we talked that I could talk 6 hours about everything I love about it, but I could talk, 6 hours about everything I don't like about it too.
Yeah, definitely.
There's just, and it's one of those films that when it's on, I don't question it, but when it's over, I go, oh, if they had done this, if they had crossed this T and dotted this I, so. Here's a couple quick things. Here's a couple quick things for those of you who don't know some of my issues with it. One is, I think it was a complete mistake to have Bobby Briggs say in the film, "Jacques, you crazy fucking Canadian."
Yeah, I remember you saying that.
Get that out of there. If you're gonna have anybody cuss in this movie, it's Laura Palmer, and that is it, because she wasn't the one in the show. She's the one that can break the R rating. Nobody else can, because they didn't talk like that in the show.
But do you think when put in hand with some of the location changes and even the little things you're talking about, like switching, the portrait from school and home, and just generally, kind of making it more the Laura Palmer story, you don't feel like when taken hand in hand with that, it kind of makes sense?
Oh, well, it makes sense.
In a way, it kind of makes it the anti-Twin Peaks movie.
It does.
Like you were saying.
I'm just saying that these are things.
I mean, I get your point, but
these are just things that just would have made the experience flow better for me, because when I go see a Twin Peaks movie, like you say, even if they even have Twin Peaks, even if it's just called Fire Walk with Me,
you want some continuity.
Well, not even certainly continuity, but it's like you're paying money to go see this movie that is going to in some way continue or build upon the story we know. Okay, but every moment of the film is somebody shoving it back in your face, going, "This is the anti-Twin Peaks." Yeah, and so you have to it's almost like the sycamore trees in order to get to the Black Lodge. It's like you have to force yourself through the brush of David Lynch saying this is the anti-Twin Peaks to see what he's doing. Because for the casual viewer, the movie is a giant fuck you to them.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing.
Sometimes
I'm always interested. I'm always kind of interested in the non-Twin Peaks fans' response, because the general line is, do not see this movie if you haven't seen Twin Peaks, which makes sense.
Of course.
But I will say, some of the people I know of who have seem to appreciate the movie the most, just from, people I know and comments I've read, are people who either weren't that big on the show or actually hadn't even seen it. And it makes me wonder, because I think that's such a small sample size of people who saw the movie and didn't see the show that it's really hard to gauge anything. But it's interesting. I think it would be interesting to actually almost like have a group of people, who are hopefully into surrealism or David Lynch or whatever, watch the movie without seeing the show, and other people watch it after, and kind of compare the two reactions and see which group actually liked it more. Because part of me suspects that the non-Twin Peaks fans might actually, at least on the first viewing, might actually like it more because they come to it with less expectations.
And you're right. You're completely right. I've shown it to many people who have never seen the show.
Okay.
Like I said, I've shown it to many people who haven't seen the show.
Yeah.
Some of them were perplexed. Some of them didn't like it. Some of them liked it, but they didn't ever compare it to the show because they didn't see the show.
Yeah.
And
it's an interesting thought.
But there is a podcast for anyone who is interested. There is a podcast called The Projection Booth, and they did just this. They did a 3.5-hour podcast about Firewalk with Me
a while ago,
and they did it with 3 people: one who had seen the show and then watched the movie, one who hadn't seen the show and watched the movie, and one who never even seen a David Lynch movie before. So it's interesting. One thing that I remember when the movie came out and I hadn't seen it yet. I was staying with my sister for the summer, and of course her town didn't have Firewalk with Me open. So when I got back to town, some friends had already seen it, and I said, "How was it?" And my friend Bobby said, "Well, they're in the roadhouse again, and they're all crying again." And I don't understand. And it was kind of funny, but it's weird though, because if there is sort of a nostalgia even for Firewalk with Me, it's that, and obviously Mulholland Drive was 8 years later. Depending if you saw the pilot or saw the movie version. But I think it's really interesting how Firewalk with Me could, and I underline this a million times on a podcast, could never play in a multiplex theater today like it opened in 1992.
Yeah, that's another really
August 28th, 1992.
It was the Twin Peaks movie.
Firewalk with Me opened August 28th, 1992, and at theaters across America, except for the town I was staying in. But but it was just, that's an amazing thing. This movie would never get a wide release today. Never.
I wonder if you look at the number of theaters it was released in, if any Lynch movie since then has been released, even The Straight Story, because even though that was pretty mainstream, I don't think it was a huge wide release.
It was.
It was? Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe it was.
Walt Disney put their money behind it. So.
That's true, yeah.
And anyway, but that's a whole other podcast when we're dealing with Straight Story and Mulholland Drive and all that stuff.
One thing I did want to say about Mulholland Drive that occurred to me while we're talking about the relationship between Twin Peaks and Firewalk with Me, the relationship between the show and the film is really almost exactly like the relationship between the first 2/3 of Mulholland Drive and the last third. Because, not just in the sense that it was shot as a TV pilot and the last third was shot to be a movie, although that's important too, but just in terms of, the subversion of what we've been watching.
Right.
It's the same thing. It's like these likable characters, this world that kind of mixes darkness and innocence but keeps it in balance, and then last third of Mulholland Drive is just bleak and dark and sad and
people masturbating
violent.
And crying at the same time.
Exactly, and it's that is kind of a microcosm of what he did over the course of 3 years with Twin Peaks and Firewalk.
Well, what's interesting too is that Mulholland Drive always seemed to me like a more expensive version to what David Lynch was forced to do with the Twin Peaks pilot when it went to Japan by adding that extra ending to it.
Well, yeah, it's almost like he. It's almost like if in 1989 or 1990 they'd been like, no, we're not interested in Twin Peaks, and it's like, all right, Cheryl Lee, come on, we're going up to Snoqualmie, and like shot the last half hour of Firewalk with Me and just attached that to the end of.
Now that's how the pilot should have ended.
Yeah, right. That would have been a great ending, actually. In fact, now I think I have a fan edit in mind. I'll get to it.
I mean, honestly, if you think about it, the pilot for Japan, how it ends with the Red Room and this weird 25 years later thing. I mean, honestly, that extended pilot should have been that should have ended with a flashback of Laura getting killed, and that's the end. That would be great.
That would be like pretty much the only way to end it satisfactorily. The one thing I like about the European pilot, and not counting the Red Room, because I just consider that part of the episode. It fits so much better in episode 2. I just mentally put it in there. But the scene at the hospital where they've got Bob reciting his poetry and all that stuff.
You mean Mike?
It's fascinating to me because, and I did a video essay recently about David Lynch, sort of focusing on his treatment of abuse and violence and evil, and how, in the early movies, it's usually sort of an external, threat, like it's somebody like Frank, who's a part of the criminal underworld, or maybe a corrupt cop or something, but they kind of keep it at a safe distance. And then with Twin Peaks, look, it's Daddy. It's like the last person you would expect or want it to be. And then after that, it gets even closer to home. You get, Lost Highway, Mulholland Drive. It's inside of the characters themselves. So anyways, point being, the interesting thing about the pilot is when you view it as part of that transition, it's really fascinating to see that at that point Bob isn't supernatural. He certainly isn't a part of Leland. In fact, Leland's the one who calls up and says, "Hey, send him over to the hospital. This my wife saw the guy there," and all this stuff. And he's basically this weirdo criminal outsider who's almost like a cult figure or something, hiding in the basement of the hospital, and they gun him down, and it's sort of like a continuation of the treatment of evil in Blue Velvet in a way. So it's really fascinating for me to watch that juxtaposed with what they ended up doing instead. And I know that supposedly they intended Leland always to be the killer, but it's one thing to
it was always you, Ray.
Mind, but not actually figured out how you're going to approach it yet. You know what I'm saying?
Sure. And, what's interesting about Fire Walk with Me is that even though, the film is literally split into two halves, right? You have the Teresa Banks murder, you have then Laura Palmer's story. And then
like all of his movies.
And everything since 1992 has been that structure.
Anything he wrote anyways. Yeah.
Everything he wrote, not counting Straight Story. But it just becomes two stories. And yes, Lost Highway, Mulholland Drive, and Inland Empire may be the trilogy about identity in living in the Los Angeles area. But at the same time, though, all of those films still have a first half and then a second half that is somewhat related. And if you go back to another filmmaker who dabbled in that type of storytelling, you'd have to go back to 1968 when Stanley Kubrick made 2001.
That's a pretty good comparison, actually.
I mean, even though those films have nothing in common, we do know that Lynch loves Kubrick. He says that Lolita is one of his favorite films. Yeah. And obviously we can see why. But it's just interesting how he really likes this dual identity of stories, right?
Yes.
And he hasn't looked back since.
And it's interesting. One of the things I noted myself, kind of, watching all of his films together in a row, which I did a couple months ago, was that the doubling thing they were talking about with the narrative structure happens exactly at the time that he's actually integrating the good and evil inside of single characters. So it's like the narratives get more complicated, or how would I put it? The narratives get more split and divided as the characters get more integrated. I don't know what the hell that means, but it's interesting that that's how it happened, I'm sure he doesn't know why that is either, but it happened.
But you know what though?
Fast.
I mean, listen, and I'm not saying this is the reason. All right, I'm only speculating based off history, right?
Sure.
But we also know that David Lynch is an artist that works from the gut, from the instinct, right?
Yes.
He goes where his passions and his curiosities lie. Sometimes, I mean, to this day, if you asked him what Mulholland Drive was about, he would say, it's about 2 hours and 25 minutes. I mean, he doesn't know and he doesn't care, and if he does know, it's just because that's the way it needs to be. All right?
Yeah.
But I am looking at this as an observer, as a film fan, as a David Lynch fan, as a critic. Okay?
Yeah.
I'm going to throw out a speculation and see what you think. All right?
Sure.
We know that he is a genuine artist.
Mm-hmm.
And not just with film, right? I mean, he is an artist, whether he's drawing, painting, taking pictures, etc., right?
Right.
Okay. Artists draw from their own life.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you're dealing with it on an abstract, surreal level, correct? I mean, somehow it comes from you, so there, even if it's in your subconscious. I mean, David Lynch has even gone on to say that one time he went to see a therapist and
I remember that.
and asked him, "Could this ruin my creativity?" The guy said yes. David Lynch said thank you, and he walked out. Okay, so we know that obviously he has things inside of him that he wants to express.
Right.
I'm gonna throw this out there because you're talking about dual identities and
mm-hmm.
and people being inside other people and that type of thing.
Right.
You know when this narrative structure started? When he left Isabella Rossellini for Mary Sweeney.
Yeah, that's true.
And I'm not suggesting that he's a bastard or something like that because he either left her or cheated on her or whatever. I don't know. Obviously, we don't know what happened. But I think it's interesting that once he hooked up with Mary Sweeney, the narratives changed.
Yeah.
And
well, you wonder too. It's like at what, and does what came first, the chicken or the egg? Did his personal life change because of things changing in his, outlook? I guess I would say, which also affected the work.
And remember, he dated Mary Sweeney for years, and then they got married and then got divorced within months.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I read. I don't know that much about his biography. I read a little bit, which said, I think he's married to the girl from Inland Empire now, right?
Right.
Yeah, one of the girls from that thing. But they were saying they got married briefly to. It was like a personal thing. I'm guessing it had something to do with, the whatchamacallit. I don't even know, like financial reasons or whatever, But I think they were done at that point when they got married.
It's interesting.
Kind of
it's just interesting
odd,
because that sometimes that's an artist mentality though. It's like you date somebody, you date somebody, you get married. It's
that
like,
affects your work. Yeah,
it affects
Who
your
knows?
work. Who knows?
I don't know. I mean that's.
But it's interesting that when he was with Isabella Rossellini, the films were a certain way. His work was a certain way. Once he and then I'm not saying that Mary Sweeney is the cause for the death and destruction of Lost Highway that's going on in these movies. I am just suggesting that he changed as an artist when he began this new relationship.
Yes, they definitely coincided. That part's safe to say.
Exactly, and I remember seeing the him and Mary Sweeney with Michael J. Anderson walking up the steps of the Cannes Film Festival in May to do Fire Walk with Me, and I'm just thinking, who's this girl? I've never even heard of this girl. What happened to Dwayne Dunham?
Well, that was a big thing. That was a big thing too. Was actually, you just kind of raised another interesting point, which is whether or not she changed him as a girlfriend. She certainly changed him as an editor.
Sure. Sure.
The films changed a lot when she took over as the main editor from Dwayne Dunham. So
much so that when she didn't edit Inland Empire, Jennifer Lynch told me that one thing she really missed about Inland Empire was her editing, which I thought was really I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
Quick thing, I don't want to go too much on a
sure.
Tangent here, but. It's funny though how there's a guy that usually does these Twin Peaks podcasts with me, James, and he's one of the admins over at Bring Back Twin Peaks on the Facebook page.
Yeah.
And we like to
your podcast with him, I think, was the one that got me sort of involved with this, what we're doing right now.
Yeah, and one thing that we always joke about, but even though we joke about it, we're a little serious about this, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's safe to say that most people, not everybody, but most people, I am not one of them, but most people would say the worst subplot of Twin Peaks is the James and Evelyn subplot.
I could be on board with that.
Okay,
I have to think about some of the others.
Mine's not. Mine is the mayor and the redhead. No,
that's pretty bad too.
Okay,
they're in close contention.
Okay, but a lot of people would say, right, that that the James and Evelyn subplot is the worst one of the Twin Peaks saga.
Yeah.
Okay, well, here's the thing. We were just talking the other day about how if James had not gone off with Evelyn, if he had gotten to the town where Teresa Banks was and maybe hooked up with like Teresa Banks' sister, and then
extending the mystery in the story,
but not knowing it was Teresa Banks' sister or something like that.
Yeah.
Then when Donna gives him that big speech at the picnic about you need to go away and stuff like that, it makes sense for him needing to go away because it shows that wherever he is going in the local area, the Laura's ghost is following him. You know,
and see that's what kills me too. Sorry, keep going. I didn't mean to cut you off.
But one quick thing we're saying is that even though a majority of the Twin Peaks fans will say and swear up and down that the James and Evelyn subplot is terrible, sometimes James posts about it on the page just to drive everybody bonkers.
Yeah.
Because but what's funny is that subplot had to have been near and dear to David Lynch because half of that whole subplot is the second half of Lost Highway.
Yeah. No, I'm trying. Yeah, actually, that's an interesting point.
So it's weird.
Never thought of that. Because I always just assume he had nothing to do with the show after Leland. Because that's one of the things I'm really hoping this oral history book clears up. Because people, as you say, I don't want to, beat a dead horse or whatever the expression is here. Because I know you've discussed it numerous times. But very briefly, the whole narrative about Lynch's involvement with Twin Peaks is totally skewed, and
it's
I
wrong.
sent you that thing Harley Peyton left on it. So for listeners, Harley Peyton, one of the writers and producers of Twin Peaks, left a comment under a Salon piece, which was describing the show's rise and fall and the impact it had on other TV shows. And one of the things they state, which is a common misperception, is David Lynch was very involved with season 1, but then he went off to shoot Wild at Heart, and season 2 fell off the rails, which is not true. He shot Wild at Heart during season 1. He wasn't, as Harley Peyton noted in his comment, he said, actually, Lynch was gone. It was basically Frost running the show in season 1. He said Lynch came back in season 2, and Frost went off to direct a movie, Storyville. Now, what Harley Peyton doesn't talk about, and what I can't seem to get a straight answer from anybody about, is what the hell happened to David Lynch after Leland Palmer died? Or really even after Leland Palmer was revealed as the killer. Suddenly the show feels very different. You just, and from anecdotal evidence, people like Kyle Mclaughlin felt abandoned, said that Lynch was no longer caring for the show, he wasn't around. So was it really just a matter of him getting so pissed off about, losing that thread that he just walked? Because he wasn't doing anything particularly.
Well, they had the show.
Lynch, he's always working on stuff.
But they had the show American Chronicles on Fox at the same time.
Yeah, that's true.
And
but that was during the first half of season 2 as well, and he was still involved with it. Like, it just something about the chronology.
Yeah, but you remember they're shooting the episodes.
Fit.
They're shooting the episodes at least 2 months in advance.
That's another. We'll get to that in a second, but that's another. I don't know. We should probably do a whole episode after the oral history book comes out.
Well, like I said,
I'm hoping it has big revelations. I don't know. Maybe it won't.
I don't know, but what I I mean, I love the fact that when people continuously say that, right?
Yeah.
That, the Lynch was busy working on Wild at Heart. And it's like, I love that Harley Payton says, anyone who, this can be solved in like 20 seconds if you look up the chronology of when because obviously Wild at Heart premiered in May of 1990 for the Cannes Film Festival.
They didn't even know if the show would get a second season at that point.
Exactly.
Personally,
personally, I think that I think Lynch. Personally, I think Mark Frost left to go do Storyville after the Laura Palmer thing.
Okay, yeah.
And I think Lynch walked.
Darn it! I'm losing you again.
It's okay. And I think Lynch.
Okay, can you say it again? Sorry.
I think Mark Frost, obviously, he left to go do Storyville, but I think David Lynch walked too, just for a while.
Yeah. He had to have.
He had to, because I think Harley Payton and Bob Engels and Leslie Lincoln Glatter, I think they were running it for a little bit. And I think if Lynch wasn't preparing something, like maybe he was trying to get another movie off the ground, I think he was trying to do Ronnie Rocket again and stuff like that, going off. I mean, obviously he was at the pinnacle of his critical acclaim, right? So he's going to try and go for every green light he can. I think that he walked for a while, and he may have just been, I'm done with Twin Peaks for a while, and then came back when Mark Frost came back for Windom Earle. And that's why all of a sudden the show gets a jolt of energy back. And you may not care for the character, but the show, you have to admit,
it's definitely an improvement from where it was.
For the last 8 but you know what? That when you look at the show, it's only like, I know it's a long time because there's not many episodes of the show, but it's only like 4 or 5 episodes before Windom Earle kicks back in. Yeah. Where if you binge watch it, it's fun and silly, and I actually really like those episodes because they are silly, and it's nice to be away from the darkness for a while and just kind of have some fun.
I've mixed feelings. Like, I think the last time I watched it, and here's another thing I should admit, is when I did the episode guide where I wrote up each episode, I ended with the episode where Leland is captured and dies, and I jumped to the finale because I really just honestly didn't have that much to say about all the episodes in between. So the last time when I got back into Twin Peaks this spring, that was actually the first time I watched the second half of season 2 since the first time I watched the whole show, period. And when I watched it again, I thought, okay, actually these aren't as god-awful as there's good moments in each. There's some really bad moments, but there's usually at least a few good moments or scenes in each episode. One of the great things I love about second half of season 2 is Major Briggs becomes a bigger character, and I love Major. Everybody loves. There's nobody on earth who doesn't like Major Briggs.
But very few people liked him.
Cool little things.
Very few people liked Major Briggs in season 1.
Because he doesn't really do anything.
He's kind of just the stern dad, and then he becomes like one of the great, awesome characters by the end of season 2.
Yeah, it's great. But the one thing I was just going to say though, real quick, before you go on, was with the second half of season 2. So I watched it again, and I thought, okay, it does have good moments. It does have all of that. It still feels kind of pointless. Mm-hmm. And I think what killed me the first time I watched it is that there were so many directions the show could have gone in. Like, even what you said, James and Teresa Banks, that would have been better. But what they did, and what I think I have a problem with, is the show had changed at that point, because the way they... you know what? Actually, we'll get into this in a minute, because it's almost a whole other conversation. So continue with your thought, and then we'll get
what's
back
really
to
funny is when right before Fire Walk with Me came out, Lynch had another show with Mark Frost came out called On the Air that only 8 episodes were made, but only 3 aired. Okay, people.
I know.
So. What's interesting about it is that I remember the critics at the time said, "Oh, look, it takes place exactly where the awful second season of Twin Peaks left off."
Yeah.
Because it is the same tone as Nadine wrestling. I mean, it's a similar tone, and it's the same tone of Dick getting bitten by the pine weasel. It's that same tone. Anyway,
although I will say, I think with Lynch, and I've only seen the pilot episode of On the Air. I haven't seen the other ones. Mm-hmm. But I will say with that, I kind of liked it. I kind of enjoyed it, and it seems like because it's Lynch, he does that zaniness and he takes it to the nth degree. where
Right.
it's just like that. My favorite thing is the Blinky, the what is it? He's doing sound or something.
Right,
like
Tracy
that.
Walter.
Yeah, they think that he is. They think that he's blind because he's so clumsy and everything, but actually he sees 26.5 times faster or more information than anybody else, and they show like the dancing Santas or whatever. It's like, I don't know, but yeah. Anyway, sorry.
No, but I mean it's funny because yes, I agree that some of those episodes seem a little pointless, but if you watch them, I mean, there are things that do continue to move the series forward.
Mm-hmm.
It's not doesn't feel like the series is at a standstill. Maybe if you think back as a collective group of episodes, it may feel that way. But when you look at the episodes, I mean, there's many other things they have to talk. I mean, they obviously have to deal with Hank Jennings and you know, there's a lot of stuff to deal with there. I think the problem is this. It concentrated a little bit much on James and Evelyn. They really played that subplot. I mean, it wasn't just the fact that it was that subplot. It was the fact that they devoted so much energy to it, but basically to give some of the cast members a break or to go do Saturday Night Live or whatever like that. But the thing that's funny is that one of the James, who regularly does some of the podcasts with me, he talks about how when all of a sudden, you know, Major Briggs is missing and Cooper's looking at the light at the end of that episode, the very next episode starts off with and it's James on the bike, you know, while the opening credits rolls. And I remember James saying to me, it feels like the James Hurley spin-off show at this moment.
You know, somebody on YouTube actually took the time to edit all of the James scenes together and bill it as James, a spin-off show of Twin Peaks.
Oh, sure.
This is actually on YouTube.
Oh, yeah.
It's like I didn't actually watch it, but somebody posted it on one of the Twin Peaks groups, and literally, it's just they basically say this is the pilot for a series about James going off on different adventures every week.
Exactly. I mean, I've
whole thing together.
I've threatened the viewers of this podcast or listeners of this podcast to that I was going to eventually cut the whole James and Evelyn saga together as one big movie.
Yeah, somebody did. They beat you to it.
Oh, they already did?
No, this is literally on YouTube. They call it James, a Twin Peaks spinoff.
All right, cool. Well, thank you. You saved me time and energy of doing that.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
Now you can just point them to it.
Cool, perfect. But what happened was, I think what drives people nuts about those episodes after Laura's murder is solved and before Wyndham Earl kicks in is that, again, go back to this is 1990. This is still 1990 because
end of the year, I guess. December or something.
No, it was November.
Okay.
You have to understand that each episode is a week in between.
Yeah.
I mean, each episode's a day in reality of the time of the show. But again, between each episode was a week. So you had 5 straight weeks of what? Nadine wrestling, Andrew Packard's back. What, you know what I mean? So while if you watch it in one afternoon, it might be 2.5 hours or 3 hours of which is 4 episodes without commercials.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel that bad. You're like, oh, this is funny and this is crazy and zany, and then it gets back on track. Whereas you go 5 weeks, that's when you lose your viewership. And people were already jumping off the train once we started getting Supernatural. Exactly. I mean, I told you the last time I talked that a friend of mine's parents, you know, several parents actually have told me the moment they turned it off was when Cooper was laying on the ground in season 2 at the beginning, and the waiter kept coming in. I heard about you because it just dragged and dragged and dragged. And listen, I like that opening of season 2, but you have to admit that is the slowest episode of the whole show.
I've gone back and forth on it. The first time I saw it, like watching the series, loved it. When I went back to do the episode guide, I was actually like, I don't really like this episode. And the reason was, I do like the opening with the waiter and the giant, but there is a hell of a lot of time spent sort of reiterating things and dwelling on exposition.
Well, that's to catch people up.
It makes sense when you consider, the context. They're trying to catch people up on the show. I think now, looking back, I'm a little more mixed. I do see the flaws in it. I think there's a lot of great things about it as well.
Well, here's the flaw I have
talk with Bobby, and I love this. Here's a little side note for you. I always like to think when Maddie breaks the glasses, at the table, which is sort of a weird random moment. I've heard people say they think it's because she saw, the blood stain, and now she thinks the glasses. I don't know. What I always took it to be was actually just David Lynch, because this is the first episode Lynch directs with Cheryl Lee as Maddie, because she wasn't in the two he did in season 1. And I always kind of like to think that he came on the set and he was like, "Oh, all right, get this ridiculous curly wig off her show. Okay, she's gonna have long black. And what are these glasses? All right, just here, Cheryl. Here's what I want you to do. Just sit down. Just snap these glasses in half and say." Like, it just feels like such a Lynch thing to do,
Right.
Like totally not because of the plot, just because he's like, this isn't how I want you to look. Look like this.
Well, here's a couple things. Here's a couple quick things for the listeners of this podcast about that episode. One, when Andy runs and knocks the board on his face, in the background, when they show Andy and they cut to Cooper and Truman, but in the background is Albert and his FBI men. They pull up in the car. Albert takes off his glasses 5 times. Every time they cut back to Andy, he's whipping off his sunglasses again.
So he just did every single take.
Yeah, and then it cuts in for a close-up of Albert, and he takes off his sunglasses and says, that line. And I think it's hilarious that, like, that's how rushed they were, that they couldn't even match the shots. You know what I mean?
See, I feel like I have a different suspicion. I think that, because I haven't noticed that before, I think that was just Lynch stretching it out as long as he could go. Because for some reason, and this is one area I kind of actually I'm not on the same page as Lynch with. I'm sure he's heartbroken. But but the whole thing with Andy being kind of this completely goofy klutz, I kind of like him more when he's just like sort of a quiet simpleton. But Lynch obviously loves the Andy being like, this clumsy, goofy, walking cartoon. And my take on that is that he loved, what's his name? The actor. I can't remember the actor's name, but, he loved the actor who plays Andy's reaction so much that he just told Dwayne Dunham or whoever edited it, just find a way to get every single one of these takes in this sequence.
Right.
So that every time he cuts back, it's just another take of him staggering around, like what was meant to be, a 5-second shot or something. He just found a way. Like that's, if I was going to lay odds on it and bet on it, that would be my bet. But that's just David Lynch, like extending that moment just for the fun of it.
Okay, now I've said this before, but some people listening to this might not have heard me say it, so I'm going to say it again.
Okay. Go ahead.
In this same episode, we have Donna, and she comes into the jail cell to see James, and she's wearing the blue sweater and the dark glasses and the hair. Okay, this episode premiered in September of 1990. I believe September 17th, if I'm correct.
Actually, September, because I just did with the roundup.
The
they were talking
21st
about
or
it,
something?
September 30th, I think. Last day of September. Yeah, because there's a review or there's a column somebody wrote where they're talking about it airing that night and what's going to happen, and they're not going to reveal.
Okay.
Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because I met my first girlfriend like a week before that. Okay.
I see. You got the timing in there.
Yeah. Okay. But what I'm saying is Donna's outfit, the way she looks with the sunglasses, hair, blue sweater. Mm-hmm. I'm not kidding you, people. This is a fact. Go back and watch. Not the opening segment where you see the dead bodies, but the after the movie properly starts. Mm-hmm. Go back and watch John McNaughton's Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer. His first victim is wearing that exact outfit with the same glasses.
That's odd.
Which is weird, because I remember seeing that, and I had just seen that movie because it just came out on VHS. And I remember thinking, is Donna going to die?
And that's interesting, too, because you could say, oh, that's a 1990, but Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer was shot in, 1986 or something?
Correct.
I know it came out in 1990, but it was done way earlier.
I know, but what I'm saying, though, is that it's weird that the costume designer or David Lynch would dress Donna Hayward in the exact outfit of a woman that Henry was going to kill.
I have nothing. I have no observation. I have nothing.
I know, but it's just weird because it doesn't happen again. You know what I mean? So
it's always interesting when Lynch does sort of overt film references because he doesn't really, he's a fan of Hitchcock and Wilder or whatever, but he doesn't really ever kind of come off as like a cinephile in interviews. He doesn't really like to talk about influences too much, or
In fact, a lot of people will say
explicit,
that he doesn't.
But yet there
watch
are things
movies.
in his movies and his, and Twin Peaks that are just overtly.
I mean, the big ones, right?
References to another movie.
The big ones are Laura, Vertigo.
Mm-hmm.
And not just the fact that we're dealing with in Vertigo like two women that might be the same dealing with Laura and Maddie. It was also the fact that the guy's name was Ferguson, right? And
and Madeline.
Madeline. Then there was Laura, and then there was and in Laura there's a character named Bob and Lydecker.
And there was going to be a Judy eventually.
Exactly. Okay. So. It is interesting that Lynch says all the time that that he doesn't watch many movies and stuff, and maybe that's true.
The ones he did watch certainly made an impact.
They certainly did. And I don't know, but we got the Blu-ray set coming out in a few weeks. I'm actually not going to be online very much that week, not because I'm going to be sitting there just pouring through the Blu-ray set. It's because it's going to take some time for Amazon to get me the Blu-ray set with the way I have my free shipping. Usually takes like 9 days sometimes, unless it's like
you're making me worried.
Unless it's out of Vegas.
I did a site called Family Video because they had a better deal. It was like $88, but I've heard mixed things. I've heard some people say I got it within a few days of release, and other people say I got my thing a month later. I'm just like,
I know.
There's no way I can wait.
But I have been waiting 20-something years to see these deleted scenes to Firewalk with Me. So I will not be on the internet that week because it will be everywhere, and people will be weighing in, I like this, I hated this, this was a waste of time, I liked it. And I don't want to be sitting there the whole time hearing these people's comments when that scene loads up. So I'm done. I mean, this is for that week because it's too important to me to just have that wasted by the internet. The internet is a great tool, but it has destroyed many, many things in people's lives. Some of it, and I say this all the time, and I'm sorry if you hear this again, but I honestly think that movies are suffering tremendously since the internet came out. Because while it's just evolved into a different thing. Or devolved, I guess. But I miss the days of going to a movie theater and being surprised by the trailers. Like, oh my God, they made a movie about that? As opposed to, they've been working on that for 6 years. And I already saw the trailer on YouTube, and now I have to sit through it in the movie theater again. Jesus, Yeah,
it's like, I think you have to be kind of selective because you can avoid things on it. Like, personally, I don't really follow any of the new releases coming out that much. I'm too sort of absorbed with whatever I'm catching up with, on DVD. So stuff will come out and I'll have no clue what people like. I'll see a comment on Twitter or something like. I'll be like, oh, this is a movie now, which seems totally bizarre. But I think the internet is sort of a mixed bag. It's like on the one hand you can stumble across all these things you don't want to see. On the other hand, you can also be very selective and kind of choose, what you want to focus on.
Exactly. And I am choosing
Go ahead. Sorry, keep going.
I said I'm choosing to stay offline when the Blu-ray set comes out until I see it.
Yeah, that's smart.
And then I'll get back on. But anyway, I really do hope that you come back on this podcast because even though we talked about Twin Peaks here, and I know there's plenty more we can say about Twin Peaks and Firewalk with Me, there's a lot more we can say about David Lynch's filmography altogether, and I think that his work is one of the
movies in general,
And I think he is one of the most important directors that maybe his work should start getting their own individual podcasts as opposed to being lumped into one big one. That just did not sound good at all. So one big one.
Before we segue into that or or wrap it up, one last thing I kind of wanted to talk about too was sort of tie it all together. What you were saying earlier about season 2 shifting, I think what's interesting to me about that is I think that's it's kind of an interesting segue into Firewalk with me, because like you were saying, season 2, it gets a lot lighter, and in a way it's kind of a relief because you're not dwelling on the darkness and everything. But to me, Twin Peaks became something different when Leland was revealed as the killer, and even before that, the lead up to that,
right,
from beginning of season 2 to that point when they bring in Bob more heavily and the stuff. I think the reason season 1, a lot of people feel it's the best. I kind of feel like, personally, I think my favorite part of the show would probably be the first half of season 2. But I think there's a reason people love season 1 so much, and the reason is everything feels related, even though it isn't. Even though the sawmill fire and Josie's story and Shelley and Bobby's affair and Nadine and Ed, even though those things actually don't have anything to do with Laura's death, the way the show is constructed, it all feels closely locked together. Like they did a good job weaving the different subplots together. And then I think what happened is, people got so wrapped up in who killed Laura Palmer, and there became such pressure to reveal that they started worrying, well, what's going to happen to the show when that's gone? And right away, from the first episode of season 2, you start to see the subplots fragmenting a little bit. Like, suddenly the stuff with Leo coming back home and being in a coma, you can tell it has nothing to do with anything else. And you can tell that Nadine being Super Nadine, it's like suddenly the world of Twin Peaks splinters into these different little mini worlds that aren't interrelated. And for me personally, that's when I kind of stopped caring about a lot of the characters and subplots. Even though I love first half of season 2 for the Laura Palmer mystery, the rest of the plots stop engaging me at that point because they don't feel interlocked anymore. And I think I see what they were trying to do, which is, show, build up viewers to kind of get, involved with other aspects of the show that weren't Laura Palmer related, but it takes away a little bit from the cohesiveness of it, and it makes it feel a little bit, and I think what comes out of that, the bad part is that all the different other parts of the show that aren't related to the Laura Palmer mystery suddenly start to go flat a little bit. I think the good part is the part that is the Laura Palmer mystery actually gets stronger. It's like sort of the balance of the show, it becomes an imbalance. And, that is like almost like a vampire. That storyline just starts sucking up all the energy of the show. And so that there's certain episodes where it'll start off like gangbusters and you're just totally wrapped up. And then for about half the episode in the middle stretch, for the middle half hour or 20 minutes or whatever, they'll go into these other subplots. And I personally, I get a little disengaged at that. It's like, okay, we're seeing Nadine, ripping out the refrigerator door or whatever. And then at the end of the episode, it'll pick up again because they're getting back into the Laura stuff. And I think, so that's where you start to see the seeds planted of the show not being able to survive, because even though there were all these different characters and stories in season 1, they all were linked. There was something holding them all together, Just give you a quick example. The sawmill fire, okay, it's got nothing to do with Laura Palmer's death per se. But, Shelley and Bobby are directly involved through Leo, and we know that Leo's involved with Laura's death somehow. So there's just these links that make it compelling and give you this sense of, excitement, like you're getting pulled into this world, and it's kind of like Blue Velvet or something like that, where, And I think what happens after they reveal Leland as the killer, it's a few things. Narratively, what happens is now you've taken that element, which was becoming increasingly the only really compelling thing about the show, and you've taken that out completely, so that all you're left with are these disconnected subplots. And you see that really strongly in that first post-reveal episode, because suddenly that's all we're left with. And I remember thinking, expecting something, because the show had, up to that point, you know, giving you the hint that everything's connected, that there's some dark secret behind everything. I kept thinking there was going to be twists, right? So, like, for example, when James goes off and, you know, he meets Evelyn Marsh, I thought, okay, well, there's going to be something more here. There's going to be some sort of deeper, darker secret that we're not seeing that's going to come out. And when it ended, I was like, you have got to be, that was it? There was no twist? Or like even Billy Zane coming in and romancing Audrey, I thought, okay, he's going to turn out to be a bad guy or something. There's going to be some ironic, you know, element here that's going to surprise us. And nope, it was just a normal sort of run-of-the-mill soap opera romance. So it was like they lost that element. And so that's one thing. And then the other thing I think that happened, you know, it's what we were talking about before, which you're saying with the movie. The fact that they made the killer her father changes fundamentally the tone of the show, because, you know, you're already kind of towing the line by saying the premise of this show is, you know, this beautiful young girl was brutally murdered and assaulted and all that, but we're also going to have comedy and fun, and, you know, it's going to be sort of Hitchcockian in a way. And you're sort of playing with that line. Like, there's a great line Lynch says in one of the articles that came out before Twin Peaks premiered, where he says, the scene of Cooper reaching under the fingernail with the tweezers, he says that goes up to the line, but it doesn't cross it. And I think you have to keep the line in mind. Like, you want to go as close as you can go, but you don't want to go over that. And eventually, he doesn't follow that philosophy anymore. And it's kind of fascinating that he actually said that at one point, you know?
Right.
But what I think happens at that point, and actually, this is where I'd love to go back before we close off completely. I know you're going to have to edit this down because it's so long, but is sort of your reaction. I'm still kind of interested in how you first got into the show in the first place and all of that. But also, if you had guesses about like who the killer was and what your reaction, and also people around you that watched the show, what they thought of the eventual revelation, because I feel like when I watched it, I didn't know who it was going to be.
Right.
And
well, I used to
really enjoying like the puzzle of it, and then it got to that point. I think what happened with me, I got spoiled a little. Talking about the internet. Okay, here's an internet example for you. I was watching some video, and at the end, you know how they show, would you like to watch this video next? Would you like to watch that video? One of the videos was Bob Kills Maddie. So right away I'm like, okay, well now I know. And, you know, it didn't say who Bob was, but I started thinking, I'm like, okay, well, let's see. I mean, Maddie's staying with Leland. That kind of makes sense. And I remember thinking, okay, well, I really hope it's not Leland, because that means he killed Laura, and that's kind of gross and weird. And I don't know if, you know, I'm enjoying the show. It's fun. It's dark, but it's also, you know, you don't have to take it too seriously. And that kind of goes to a different level. And that's the level Lynch took it to. And in retrospect, I think that's absolutely correct, because I think what he's doing in Twin Peaks, sort of like what he does in Blue Velvet and some of those other movies, is he's taking you on a journey where you're watching. You're like the voyeur. You're into it, but you're at a safe distance. And then he just crushes that distance, and he says, nope, sorry, like, we're going to go all the way with this. And that, I think, is one of the reasons why I keep coming back to Twin Peaks and keep feeling so fascinated with it, because it changes in some fundamental way. It starts off as one thing, which is sort of this playful, fun, Hitchcockian mystery, and it ends up as something totally different, which is this dark, sort of like Ingmar Bergman-esque psychological study of, you know, somebody who's suffering. And it's just to see, I mean, both of those types of stories are fascinating to begin with, but to actually see that process transform, I think it's fascinating. And I think, just to wrap up my end of it, and then I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it and your experiences at the time, but for me, the reason I just can't get on board with the second half of season 2, besides the quality dip, there just seems to be something really fundamentally wrong with going from, you know, the show telling us what it tells us about Laura and her life and what that means in the town, and then cutting to the next episode and having them all be in the house, the Palmer house, for the funeral. And they're laughing and joking, and nobody's talking about what happened. And it's just like, I mean, you know, talk about surreal, it's surreal in a bad way. And actually, I'll try and send you the link, or maybe you can share it on the podcast page. But this guy, Michael Warren, who has a website, 35 Years of David Lynch, he did a blog post on that episode where he has these captions, which are hilarious because they get right to the point. It's like they have Cooper talking to Pete and somebody else, and he's saying, hey, you know, Cooper, did you hear about the mayor's feud with the brother? And then the caption under Cooper's picture says, yes, I did. Did you know you're standing on the spot where Maddie was brutally murdered 3 days before by her uncle? And they just have they have another shot of like Pete staring at the ground like uncomfortably. And it's just like, that's so true. Like, why is this, like, why are we doing this right now? After what the show has just told us, after, you know, introducing us to the mystery of the woods and Bob and having that owl fly out in the last shot and like, okay, now we're really going to plunge into the heart of darkness of Twin Peaks. They pull back and they go in this strange direction that just feels like denial, kind of, you know?
All right. Well, so, I have so much to say.
That's my take on it. But
I now I have to go back like 10 minutes and say everything I was going to say.
Yeah, interweave them.
Well, one is so many things. One is with that memorial scene. See, I really like it, but again, like much like Albert taking off his glasses in that memorial scene, you'll see in the background Donna approach Ed several times in the background, and then they cut in, and then she approaches him for their discussion before Nadine asks him if he can see her underwear and the shoes. But what's interesting is that there's a memorial at all, like a food gathering at all, because the town seems to understand, and this is something that like you would never see today, but the inner town of Twin Peaks seems to understand that Leland was sick. And I don't mean like crazy sick. I mean like mentally like there was something wrong with him, because they would never gather at a serial killer's house and mourn and mourn him.
I know, right?
Right? So there's
and they don't even talk about him that much. And I just thought of something. I'm going to throw this out there and then
because I'm trying to remember everything I'm going to say. So
I know. I just want to say this real quick. I wonder if they told them whose funeral they were gathered for. Because if they shot that scene 2 months before revealing the killer, they had to still be keeping people in the dark about what happened.
Because Sarah acknowledges Leland on the couch.
She does with Cooper, right?
She
is
with.
Mind. You can cut that part out.
when Audrey is sitting next to her and they're talking to Donna's mom.
Okay.
But
never mind.
But anyway, what I'm saying is, it's interesting because, okay, so who did people think who was the killer? Well, I used to just drive everyone crazy back in high school, and my aunt was really into Twin Peaks, and a lot of people I knew were into Twin Peaks, and they'd say, who do you think is the killer? And I'd be like, Lucy. Just to drive people crazy, because back then, mysteries always turned out to be the least likely person. Mm-hmm. And so I was just thinking, oh, this is the way. And this is before I knew David Lynch. I had seen some of his other films like Elephant Man and Dune, but I never really had placed that it was the same guy who made those movies. You know what I mean? So I was just like, well, they're just gonna throw us for a loop and make it Andy or Lucy or something like that, just because they are so not the person. And then of course a lot of people thought obviously Ben Horn, but that seemed a little too easy. Leo, obviously way too easy. So a lot of people thought Sheriff Truman, because in the pilot when Pete says she's dead wrapped in plastic, Harry goes, where, not who. And so, but of course, if you think about it, it's like, well, maybe the sheriff shouldn't ask who, because that would place importance over whose body he's looking for. It's where, you know what I mean? So that makes sense. But at the time when people were analyzing every clue, some people thought the sheriff. I personally didn't really have anything invested. Obviously, Leland as Bob or whatever, to me, I feel like there's no other way it could have been. You know, now that you know, it's like even if it had been Ben Horn, there would have been a disconnect there. but what's interesting too is there's so many things that happen in the movie that like they say in the show. That they say in the show that happens, but it doesn't show it in the movie, So again, the movie being different from the show, but like for instance, Bob Engel says that when they wrote the script for Fire Walk with Me, that a lot of the clues came out of the pilot, right? And so they wrote the prequel or quote unquote prequel / sequel to be leading up to the pilot. And that's why in the pilot, when Sarah tells the sheriff, I heard her phone ring once, right? So in the movie, the phone rings once, Laura answers it, and it's James, and she's like, James, I don't want to meet you. Okay, I'll meet you. But in the series, we find out that it was actually Leland that called her from Ben Horne's office. Right?
Yeah, that's right.
So they completely just threw, because they traced the call to the Great Northern Lodge. So obviously they didn't watch enough of the series to remember some of it. Because anyway, but if there's one scene, and it's not in the screenplay at all of Fire Walk with Me, but if there's one scene that I wanted to see in the movie, even back at the time, but of course, they never wrote the scene, they never shot it, but my God, if I had been co-writing the screenplay with Lynch, this is a scene that would have been in the film, and that is, I would have had a scene where Laura goes over to teach English to Josie, and Laura starts recognizing that Josie is not who she says she is, because Laura could spot herself in Josie. And I think that would have been, not knowing exactly who she was, you know what I mean? But just kind of getting a sense that Josie isn't the little miss, I don't speak English very well, you know what I mean? What are shenanigans, Pete?
Yeah.
I would have had that. I would have had a great scene like that. And going back to the series real quick, if they really wanted to stay with Josie, if they really wanted to cement season 1 to season 2 perfectly, Josie. Okay, listen, I'm a Twin Peaks apologist. Okay, so I will say yeah, okay. I'll finally give in. But if I'm going to be passionate about it, I'm going to be passionate about it in this instance. It never should have been Josie who shot Cooper. It should have been Wyndham Earle.
Mm-hmm.
And then that would have cemented it better. Because it makes no sense for Josie to be shooting Cooper. Yes, they throw in some...
Yeah, I never understood that, really.
No, there's some... Honest. I mean, there's some throwaway lines like, because you came here. It's like, okay. And of course, James... James and I like to make fun of the fact that when she's in the doorknob, it's because she was leaving to go shoot Heaven and Earth, so Oliver Stone's film, so they had to get her off the show, but they put her in the doorknob so that she could come back for season 3.
Yeah. Even
though her body is gone and weighed 60 pounds, so obviously there was going to be some sort of possession with Josie or something.
Yeah.
Who knows? But anyway, going back to the show, I think I really didn't have a clue who it was going to be. I honestly didn't even care. I just liked the world of it so much.
Yeah.
And one thing that I really love about the show and honestly, the work of David Lynch, let's say, okay, listen, I love everything David Lynch, but I would say 86 to 92 is my favorite period of his work, because this is when he was balanced between reality and surrealism, whereas later on he became completely surreal. And obviously, yes, he started with surrealism and Eraserhead, but he kind of worked into, I think, balance. And that's one thing that I think Twin Peaks has. The best episodes, the worst scenes, the best scenes, I don't care. The whole thing feels balanced. And if there's one thing about Fire Walk with Me is that it's not entirely balanced. It's almost dark. But that being said, it plays fair with the balance of degrees of darkness. It's not all black.
And reality and surrealism too. It's pretty balanced with that.
Exactly.
Probably more so some ways than parts of the show.
But then it's not just like dark. There's light dark and there's dark and there's dark. You know what I mean? Like the movie fluctuates as well. But yeah, I mean so much we could say about, but the reception of it at first was like, wow, what is this show? This show's amazing, this and that. And then it wasn't so much that the mystery was being dragged out. It was the fact that, just to reiterate, season 1 ended before the summer. So people were going to have to wait 3 months or 4 months before the second season premiere. So they re-aired it again so people could see it, and then, rewatch it again. And then by the time second season started, they felt like they had already sat through, 6 months before. And so it just felt like it was dragging, when in reality it wasn't. It just was, honestly, it was just a different time back then. And people expected more of a wrap up. I mean, back then you got the 2 episode, to be continued, and then the conclusion. You didn't.
Yeah.
People weren't used to watching one story over a lengthy period of time. Now, because of the advent of DVD and streaming and Blu-ray and all that stuff, now people buy season sets. And they binge watch the shows before the new season starts, or they stream it, on HBO Go. And so if Twin Peaks had come out today, you would not have had this. It would have had a different reception altogether. Completely.
Yeah, I agree.
So, it was the perfect timing for it, because nothing like Twin Peaks could be made today. But it was also the worst timing for it, because once you missed 2 episodes, you were done. You could not come back to the show. Whereas Lost, people could go on Lostpedia. People could download episodes. People could stream episodes. People could catch up. Whereas back then, you were out. You were done. And there was no way. And because very few people were watching it, especially through, second season and onward, you couldn't call up your friends and say, hey, what happened? Because chances are most of them were jumping ship. So by the time the pilot, but the finale ended in season 2, yes, 10 million people watched the finale, but those 10 million people did not watch the second season. They came back to
Somebody made a great sort of microcosm point about it. They said when the season 1 finale aired, in the town of Snoqualmie or whatever, they had to gather. They had standing room only in the lobby of the great Northern Hotel was, to see for the finale. I think they might have even had tickets for it. When the season 2 finale aired, they could barely squeeze enough people into the Marquee Diner to watch it. Just and this is in the town where it was shot,
right?
Where there's obviously more interest than there would be anywhere else.
If you go to that town today, if you go to Snoqualmie, and I was just there last year, unless you're there for the Twin Peaks Festival, which, listen, if people want to go to the Twin Peaks Festival, that's awesome.
I heard you guys talking about that.
I'm so glad.
You won't go there.
I'm so glad you guys are having a great time. I don't blame you. That's awesome. Have a great time. Me personally, Twin Peaks is a very spiritual thing. I know it sounds silly to say about a TV show, but it's a very spiritual thing for me. However, so for me, I like to go up there by myself and not be around tons of Twin Peaks fans. Now, if I went up there maybe a week or 2 before the festival and then stayed through the festival, that's a different thing. But I just wouldn't want to just go up there and share my spiritual, relation with the show with 300 other people. I'd rather just be up there with myself or, my wife or whatever like that. But anyway, if you go up there when it's not the Twin Peaks Festival, there is no indication that show was ever shot in that town.
Yeah.
The only thing you have is maybe the diner, because they have pictures up in the hallway, which if you go on this YouTube channel, I have a video posted of that entire hallway. I filmed the whole thing on video.
Oh, cool.
But...
Well, I get... keep going.
I'm just saying that, but if you go to the hotel, the Salish Lodge, basically it's funny because you walk around this corner and there's this walkway, and there's obviously whatever, not bars, but kind of where you can kind of stand and look at the falls. But it's funny because you stand there and you go, yep, this is where they set up the tripod and shot that scene where you see the hotel and the waterfall, because it's the exact shot from the show.
Yeah.
It's not they kind of did some trickery. No, it's the exact shot of the show. And while it's beautiful during the day, Don't get me wrong. It is stunning at night because, one, there's nobody there.
Yeah.
So you're just kind of there by yourself, and you can sit down on the ground, and there's a huge spot, that shot you see in the show of the hotel at night with the waterfall. That's exactly the way it looks in person there. Mm-hmm. So you're sitting there, and this huge spotlight is on the hotel, on the waterfall. You can't really film it because you can't get the right amount of light, whatever, to do it, unless obviously you have like ABC Hollywood lighting with you. But it's a stunning sight. I mean, it is one of the most beautiful sights ever. And I say that not just because of the imagery, but because of what that imagery meant to me since I was, 14 years old. You know what I mean? It feels like when you're in the town, it feels. And this is, how like Robert Rodriguez, the filmmaker, made El Mariachi. He likes to say, don't just write a script, and especially when you're like dealing with a low budget, don't just write a script and then try to make it. Sometimes write it around what you have, so that the production value goes up. Well, that's what I feel like Lynch and Frost did. I think they had Northwest Passage written. I think they had a good sense of what it was. But when they got to that town, Snoqualmie and North Bend, Washington, I think they figured out a way to incorporate the town into their vision. So it wasn't just like, oh yeah, well, we need a diner, so we're gonna shoot here. They kind of just incorporated the world of that town into their show. So that's why I feel like the show feels so lived in. It doesn't feel like just like some, random show that, just got put up. I mean, it feels like that town was there before the pilot, and it feels like the town is there after the finale. And that's why when David Lynch said to Ray Wise a few months ago, or maybe a year ago, the town's still there, Ray. It's like, yes, it is, David. It's still there. Now, what are we going to do?
Yeah.
I
know what you mean, though, about the festival experience and all that, because many years ago, I took a little side trip to, I was in Ireland. I took a little side trip to Liverpool because I'm a big Beatles fan.
Yeah.
And I went on, they have the Magical Mystery Tour bus or something. And you go, and it's a bunch of people, and they're snapping cameras, and they're like, and here's the church where John and Paul met, and they just keep driving. And I thought, that's not really, I'd kind of like to see more. So I kind of got out a map, and I studied the bus route, and I found like the actual, Liverpool commuter bus or whatever that went past the church, and I walked in, and I kind of walked around, the cemetery where they got the Eleanor Rigby grave, and I talked to the pastor, and he was telling me the whole history of the church. And it's like, if you really want to get some, and that's not, like I said, not to knock, a communal experience, that can be great too, but if you really want to kind of delve into whatever connects you to something that you're into, I think you kind of have to go off on your own sort of personal journey and experience it that way,
Right. Right.
That said, if I with some of the people they've got at the festival and all that, I'm sure it's a really cool experience.
No, I'm not
sort of the
knocking
same way.
it.
It's like you got to go on your spirit walk or whatever,
Exactly. I just think for me, again, I'm not saying this for everybody. I'm saying for me personally, if I was going to go to the Twin Peaks Festival, I would want to not stay a week after the festival, but a week before the festival, because otherwise you would just kind of redo the same things you did during the festival, and it would feel kind of clouded to me. But I was there last summer, actually a week before the festival, and I ended up leaving because I didn't have a ticket to the festival, but that's all right. But it meant so much to me because my wife had just watched the show, and she had never seen it before, even though we're the same age, pretty much. Yeah. And
so you took her too?
Yeah, I took her too, and she.
Okay, I didn't get that. That's awesome.
And she was just like, I mean, there were times where she wanted to go back to the hotel and sleep, and I wanted to stay out, so I just dropped her off and kept, walking around. But it's so beautiful to walk the town of that whole area and just be like, okay, yeah, there's the diner, and over here's the hotel, and it's like you're walking in the town of Twin Peaks, but it's so awesome, But hey, Beatles fans out there, don't forget to pick up your Criterion Hard Day's Night that just came out.
Oh, I know. That's going to be pretty cool.
It came in the mail yesterday. It's a stunner. And yes, folks, there are 3 audios. There's a mono, there's a stereo 2.0, and a stereo, I think, 5.1, I think. But the good news is this. I know this sounds silly, but you Hard Day's Night fans, you'll know what I'm talking about. Yes, when they play If I Fell in Love, or If I Fell, yes, it is for the first time on home video history. You hear the noise of George knocking over the amp. It's fantastic. Criterion redid the sound so that, because all the other releases used the different tracks and stuff, so they would like the music would take out the sound effects from the scene.
That bugs me.
But
in Yellow Submarine too, sometimes, even though that's a cartoon, they're adding all the sound effects afterwards. But same thing. It's like when they redid the soundtrack, sometimes, I don't know.
Yeah.
Sometimes it doesn't work.
But pick it up. It's a great thing, and Twin Peaks is great, and David Lynch is great. Although we will save my thoughts about Inland Empire to another podcast. But I really hope this Blu-ray set is awesome. There's another podcast on this channel where I talk about where does Twin Peaks fandom go after the Blu-ray set for casual viewers, because I think one of the things that has happened is that when new viewers have come to discover the show over the last 10 years or so, people get into it. But I think one of the reasons people get into it is because of the mystique of the deleted scenes from Fire Walk With Me, because they have been unseen. So there's like this holy grail, and people want to see it. But now that we get it, will people just go off and find something else to get behind? You know what I mean? Because now we will have everything.
My hope is that Laura Dern's telling the truth, and David Lynch is moving into a new project, and this can kind of be the springboard of everybody kind of like, hey, it's been almost 10 years since the last Lynch movie, but oh my God, we're getting all this new material, and one of his greatest works is that, and he's, doing a new thing with the Palmer family and all of that in a crowded restaurant, which I kind of like, by the way, but that's a whole other conversation. But, I think maybe this can be kind of the useful reminder and get everybody in the spirit, and then maybe, hopefully, within the next few years, he can come out with something new.
Now, I would
love that. Right.
Now, before we get off the podcast, there's one quick thing I want to say is,
sure.
Netflix came out and told Mark Frost and David Lynch, anytime you guys want to make season 3, it's guaranteed. They'd fund it. They'd fund it. Obviously.
Absolutely.
So, but obviously Frost and Lynch don't want to do that, or maybe Lynch just doesn't want to, and Frost does.
I think Frost does.
Yeah.
I don't think Lynch
and
does.
in fact,
I don't think he will.
In fact, in 2006, it's funny because I had discussions with Mark Frost's office concerning a project that I was going to be working on, just a little side project that was kind of based in the Twin Peaks universe, but not, not doing sequels or that type of thing, but just kind of based in that world. And it's funny, though, because I was told at the time that season 3 was going to come out in graphic novel form. And then, of course, that got vetoed. But some drawings have leaked out on the internet. But here's my fear, and you as a film fan, Joel, you'll understand this. My fear is Twin Peaks will be, to use a modern phrase, rebooted and put on TV and be like Twin Peaks, the next generation, and have it be where Audrey owns the Great Northern and Cooper's now the sheriff in town, and then we have a whole bunch of new kids or something in the town with a new mystery for Cooper to solve, Well, and that's my nightmare.
Well, the way I put it is it won't happen, at least as long as Lynch is alive, and probably after, I don't know who the copyrights pass on to, because what is it? I don't understand. I don't know all the intellectual property things, but I think it would go on to family members, probably like Jennifer Lynch or something.
Yeah, but ABC owns it.
Right, exactly. I don't see any way of him, because he's not going to do the Lucas thing and sell to Disney,
But I don't think they own it.
Oh no! From what I understand, him and Frost both own. They share the intellectual property, or the copyright or whatever for Twin Peaks. From what I've read, they have veto power over any licensing or trademarks or anything that uses Twin Peaks.
Well, see, that's why, because this came out in when they were filming in '89, before they were thinking about stuff like this. Today, ABC would be like, well, it was on our channel, we own it, so we're going to reboot it.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. Yeah, like it would be. I think that's one of the fortunes of the show, and I mean that's why it was a good show in the first place. is because, Lynch, what was it, Lynch Frost Productions or whatever it was.
Right.
That was like the final stop. Like, it wasn't like they had to answer to the network who had to answer to the bad blood. I mean, ultimately they kind of did, but not really. Like, there was, Frost talks about that a lot in interviews. The fact that, the buck stopped there. It stopped with Lynch and Frost, and that's such a rare thing to find. Maybe more common now with, like, HBO giving creative license to people. But, basically, and I think that's another interesting aspect. Now we're getting back into it, but I'll end on this. Even with the spin-off stuff, like something like, any other TV show, if they did a spin-off like, hey, we're going to have a secret diary of one of the characters, blah, 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 it would be like, they'd find some young adult author to do it, and it would be done in this sort of safe way that blah, blah, blah. You have literally in Twin Peaks, you have the director's daughter writing like an X-rated, version of what happens to the characters on this like beloved network television primetime show, and it being published and like, going on the New York Times bestseller list. Like, that in itself is enough evidence that like what they were doing it's so far off from what anything else has done, even to this day.
Oh yeah.
Like there's just
that would never happen today.
Control that is just unheard of.
Well, not only that, but for anyone listening, if you ever get a hold of that diary, Laura Palmer's diary, written by Jennifer Lynch, and you meet Jennifer Lynch at a festival or a convention,
I've heard
or something,
this, yeah.
she will put your initials in the people Laura Palmer has slept with, and
I've heard that.
It's really cute and funny. But yeah, I remember at the time, I got the diary in my stocking for Christmas, and I opened it up, and my mom said, I really don't know if I should be giving this to you.
Yeah, exactly.
She said, I read a little bit of it. I don't know if you should be reading this. I was 14 years old.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's funny because while the book, like you said, is kind of X-rated at times, I think that for me, as somebody who was into Twin Peaks, I didn't look at it as erotic. I was more, I was kind of looking at it the way Harold Smith wrote about himself. You know what I mean? About being a lonely soul. I never really was like turned on by Laura Palmer.
Well, yeah,
probably
and
because
it's hard
she was
to be, because basically at the end of the day, okay, there's little, you could say, oh, there's this kinky scene, but really at the end of the day, she makes it clear from page 1 to page whatever, wherever it ends, that this is it's like a terrible story. It's like the story of somebody who was abused. And I think this is a whole other conversation, but to me, The Secret Diary of Laura Palmer is step number 1 in a basically 3-step process of Twin Peaks kind of changing what it was about and refocusing on Laura Palmer and making it her story. I think step 1 is that. I think step 2 is, revealing Leland as the killer and having Maddie killed in like what is still one of the most disturbing scenes on any primetime show ever. I don't care, to this day. I don't think you could find stuff on HBO that's much more like shocking than that. Not in terms of graphic content, but just in terms of like the emotional ringer David Lynch puts you through.
And they never did it again.
Yeah.
I mean, that even though it was on at 10 o'clock at night on a Saturday, it was considered very R-rated. And in fact, real quick, speaking of that episode, the moment we come back and Ben Horn's been arrested, and then Cooper meets up with is in the sheriff's station, and they meet up with the log lady, and she says, we're going to the road. There's owls in the roadhouse. Mm-hmm. And then you have that whole scene with Julie Cruz, and then you have the murder of Maddie. I mean, I remember to this day that being the longest 15 minutes of film I've ever seen on TV. Mm-hmm. Because we were coming back and it was like 10:45 at night. And it was like, okay, they got 15 minutes. I guess Ben Horn's the killer. And then that 15 minutes, it felt like another hour-long episode of how much they crammed into that. It is. I think that 15 minutes is one of the best passages of film that Lynch has have directed since the Since the scene in Blue Velvet when Jeffrey gets into the closet all the way until Frank leaves the apartment.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you cannot believe what you're watching. And it's not like one of these things where it's like, well, this is weird and this is bizarre. You don't say anything like that until the sequence is over.
Yeah.
And I'm not kidding you, people. I know every single no, there's going to be no one listening to this podcast who disagrees with me, so that's fine. When Cooper is sitting there at the end, and that Julie Cruz music is going, and then it just slowly dissolves to the red curtains, and then the executive producer credit comes on, stunning. Yeah. You could hear a pin drop in every household that was still watching that show.
Yeah.
In 1990, I think it was November 13th or something, or something like that. You can find it online. There's the big display.
From what I remember from the roundup thing I did, it was November 10th, I think.
Yeah, Saturday, November 10th. But I mean, but they did a whole thing in a magazine or something where it said, find out on November 10th, find out who killed Laura Palmer. Yeah. Really. Yeah. You know, because they were playing to everyone going, when's it going to be solved? When's it going to be solved? And again, people, Laura Palmer's murder was solved 6 episodes before Veronica Mars solved her crime.
Yeah.
So relax, people. But again, it was a different time.
Yeah. So I feel like that's step 2 and the diary is step 1, but nobody ever talks about the diary that way. They don't, like, it seems like at the time it was like, oh, there's a spin-off, and people actually used it as evidence of like Twin Peaks selling out. They're like, well, they did a diary. It's like, well, did you read the diary spin-off? Because
hey, you know what?
It read much like a sellout thing to me.
Castle has books that come out under that author's name. The Nathan Fillion show, Castle. He's a mystery writer, and they have books published under that author's name.
Under what author's name?
You know that Nathan Fillion show, Castle?
No.
Okay. Do you know who Nathan Fillion is?
No. Not familiar with it at all.
You've never seen Firefly?
I know the show, but I'm not familiar with
Joel,
anything about
we need to talk. We need to talk. Anyway, there's a show called Castle. His character writes mystery novels. Well, the ABC puts out books under that author's name. So and those books sell like hotcakes.
Yeah.
What I'm saying though is that listen, the diary is an important piece of the Twin Peaks universe, but they don't. Well, I think they started to reprint it. But here's the thing: here's what they should do, which they're not going to now.
Of course.
You know how like on the Alien box sets you can read the original screenplays.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the diary should be on the Blu-ray set.
Me too. Totally agree with that.
Because if you're going to say Twin Peaks the entire mystery and other missing pieces, the diary should be in there. I
totally agree.
I think Agent Cooper's Diane tapes that were released on audio tape should be on there. I think that Scott Frost's book, the autobiography of Agent Cooper, should be in there, even though it conflicts with the Firewalk with Me timeline. I think whatever spin-offs they did. I think that Alan Thicke show that where he
I've seen that on YouTube.
I still have the original recording of it on VHS. It was amazing. Yeah. That should be on the Blu-ray set.
Although I do have to say, if all that stuff was on there, they would probably bump it up to like 200. And then I'd be even more in trouble.
No. I mean, all that stuff would take very little space.
Yeah, no, that's true.
But yeah, I mean, listen, this podcast could go on and on and on. So I think it's best.
I don't know what you're gonna do.
I think it's best.
What are you gonna cut?
Oh, I'm not cutting anything. This whole thing's going up.
Okay.
But you're gonna have to come back so we can discuss other aspects of this and other parts of David Lynch's filmography.
Well, actually, I was gonna say when I was saying step 1 and step 2, diary, Maddie's murder. Step 3 is Firewalk with Me, and actually, we actually ended up talking about the show a lot more. So I think we should do sometime in August, maybe after the mystery Blu-ray is out,
right?
And after that book comes out, the oral history,
right?
Kind of like an overview, like look back and maybe supplement what we talked about here with all the new observations that come out of that, because God knows there's going to be a million of them.
Right. Well, we will get there soon. Just a few more weeks. So,
by the way,
yes.
And this you can cut out if you want. Well, we'll talk about it after the recording stops, but yeah. So
Okay.
you can find.
Well,
say your final
people
words.
are now on the edge of their seat wanting to know what you are bringing up. Is it something you can tell?
All of you who've made it through the past 2.5 hours, you'll never know.
Is it
You'll
something
have to
you
tune
can?
in next installment to find out.
Well, is this something you can bring up to the millions of listeners that we have?
Oh no, it wasn't that interesting. Actually,
Okay.
that's why I was going to wait.
All right. Don't bore me on this, Joel. I'll fall
Yeah.
asleep. Okay, so my last question to you is, where can people
Sure.
find you on the internet?
So, a few places. The main central nexus is Lost in the Movies, my movie blog. It's The Dancing Image, all one word, .blogspot.com.
Okay, wait a minute.
Sure. Yes.
The dancingimage.blogspot.com.
Yes.
Why on earth is your website called Lost in the Movies then, if I have to go to the Dancing
Because it
Image?
was The Dancing Image. That was the original title, and I like that title, but I like Lost in the Movies more. And eventually it will be lostinthemovies.com. I got that I bought the domain name. I got it on GoDaddy. I'm paying for it. I'm just not using it. Don't ask why. I don't know. But I'm on Twitter under the handle @LostInTheMovies, so you can find me there too. And one thing, if I'm going to point anybody in any directions, I will tell them watch some of the videos that I've got on the blog, because I've noticed people will read written posts, like hotcakes. But when you put up a video, it's really hard to get. And I get it. You're sitting at the office or whatever. It might not be safe for work, or you don't have the time. But if you can, bookmark some of the stuff, because I think personally, the stuff that I've done that I'm proudest of is like video essays. I did a little short film about 1.5 years ago, and I love, I'm proud of a lot of the stuff I've written. But really, if I was going to show people one thing, it would often be the videos. And actually, since we're talking David Lynch, I'll plug this one. I just did a video essay called "Take This Baby and Deliver It to Death," which comes from for Lynch's. It's sort of a paraphrase of a line from the Secret Diary, and it basically focuses on Lynch's treatment of violence and abuse and evil in his first 6 films, so like Elephant Man, Eraserhead, etc., through Twin Peaks and Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. And it makes the points without narration. It's just juxtaposing clips, a little bit of audio from later films. And to me, that kind of says all the stuff I'm saying in all the written pieces, but in about 20 minutes just with video clips. And I think it's Lynch fans would enjoy watching it and kind of, discussing what they think of that theme and how it's treated, and how Laura Palmer sort of changed Lynch's career in a way as a storyteller and filmmaker. Because I think from the spring of '89, when he was setting out to make Twin Peaks and just casting this random girl from Seattle, to play a corpse, to Fire Walk with Me, where now it's all about Laura Palmer and Cheryl Lee's, basically the center of the movie. It's just a fascinating journey, and I think that impacted everything that Lynch did afterwards as well. So discuss it. If you're interested, come on. I'm always looking for comments and discussions. So anyone out there, if you've made it through 2 hours of us talking Twin Peaks, I'm sure you're game for more. So drop on by, leave a comment. All right, that's the end of my plug.
Well, listen, we just spent a few hours talking about a young girl named Laura Palmer who was sexually abused, molested, and finally raped and killed by her own dad. And yet you're telling me that you are purchasing your URL from GoDaddy.com. I'm rather disturbed by this, Joel.
That's I don't. Is that not the normal URL thing?
I'm just saying. saying. People are going to wonder.
Daddy.
People are going to check under your fingernails and see what's.
I'm not possessed by Bob. Don't worry.
No, but you are possessed by the one-armed man. So you're out to seek. You're out to seek the truth behind the Black Lodge.
Yeah, maybe Bob is after me.
You better.
All right.
You better watch out, because the moment you hear Julie Cruz music in the distance, and you hear that music and you hear that music in the air, you're done. So
I'm done.
You're done. Okay.
Well, I don't like gum, so I'll be fine.
All right. So everybody, you know where to find me, right? You have the YouTube channel, Obnoxious Anonymous 2. There's the Twitter at Obnox Anonymous. Obviously, there's the website, Obnoxious Anonymous. Was it .wordpress.com? I think. obnoxiousandanonymous.wordpress.com. You can also email me at obnoxiousanonymous@hotmail.com. All this stuff will be in the description. Thank you very much for listening. Joel, thank you for joining, and I'm sure we'll have you back. And it was a great discussion, and it's always a pleasure to talk Twin Peaks and David Lynch with people, that know what they're talking about, which is great,
That's right.
All right, so everybody, take care, and we will see you next time. Take care, and just remember, how's Annie?
We'll never know.